I've been driving long-haul trucks across British Columbia for the better part of 15 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the Yellowhead Highway between Prince George and Prince Rupert has a rhythm you can set your life by. I know every rest stop, every place where the asphalt buckles from frost heave, every stretch where the cell signal drops to nothing, and you're alone with just the hum of the engine and your own thoughts. I've driven that route maybe 200 times, through every season, every kind of weather the province can throw at you. March 2021 was the month everything I thought I understood about that highway changed. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was making a routine haul from Prince George to the coast. The sun had already dropped behind the coast mountains, and that particular kind of winter darkness was settling in, the kind where the temperature plummets fast and the world outside your headlights just disappears into black. I was running about an hour behind schedule because of a delay at the depot, which meant I'd be pushing through the loneliest stretch of the highway right around the time most sensible people were home having dinner. The temperature gauge on my dashboard read -22°C, the kind of cold that kills you if you're not prepared for it. I was about 20 kilometers past Vanderhoof when I saw him, a figure standing on the shoulder, thumb out, the universal gesture of someone needing a ride. In all my years driving, I developed a policy about hitchhikers. I didn't pick them up. Too many stories, too many risks, too many variables I couldn't control. But this was different. This was March in northern BC, with temperatures that could give you frostbite in minutes. And whoever this person was, they were wearing what looked like a denim jacket, nowhere near enough protection for this weather. I told myself I was just being practical, humanitarian even. Nobody deserved to freeze to death on the side of the highway, regardless of whatever poor decisions had landed them there. So I hit the brakes, pulled onto the shoulder about 30 meters ahead of where he was standing, and put on my hazards. Through the passenger side mirror, I watched him walk toward the truck. His gait was steady, unhurried, like the cold wasn't affecting him at all. That should have been my first warning. When you're inadequately dressed in -20 weather, you move quickly. You're desperate for warmth. This guy moved like he was taking a Sunday stroll. He reached the passenger door and opened it without hesitation. No pause, no moment of gratitude or acknowledgement. Just climbed up into the cab, pulled the door shut behind him, and settled into the seat. "Appreciate it," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. No warmth in those words, just a flat statement of fact. I got my first good look at him in the dome light before it faded. Mid-30s maybe. Dark hair, medium build, nothing particularly distinctive except for his eyes, which were a pale blue that seemed almost colorless in the dim light. And that jacket, it really was just denim, thin, worn through at the elbows. "You're gonna freeze in that," I said, pulling back onto the highway. "Where are you headed?" "Prince Rupert," he replied, still not looking at me, just staring straight ahead through the windshield at the tunnel of illumination my headlights carved through the darkness. "That's a long way. You got people there?" He didn't answer, just sat there, hands folded in his lap, perfectly still. I've picked up quiet passengers before, people who didn't want to talk, who were dealing with their own problems, so I didn't push it. I turned the heat up a notch and focused on the road. We drove in silence for maybe 10 minutes. The highway stretched out ahead, empty and dark. No other vehicles, no lights from houses or settlements. Just us and the endless black of the northern wilderness, pressing in from all sides. Then he said my name, Michael David Richardson. My full name, first, middle, and last. I glanced over at him, my hands tightening on the wheel. "How do you know my name?" He turned his head slowly to look at me, and when he smiled, it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that's just a pulling back of lips, exposing teeth. No warmth, no humor, just a mechanical gesture. "You picked me up before," he said. 3 years ago, same spot." I'd never seen this man before in my life. I was certain of it. I have a good memory for faces. You have to in this line of work, dealing with depot managers and dock workers and dispatch coordinators. I remembered the faces of people I'd met once, 5 years ago. I would have remembered picking up a hitchhiker, especially on this route. "I don't think so," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I don't pick up hitchhikers as a rule." "You made an exception," he said, still wearing that empty smile. "March 2018, same weather. You felt bad because it was so cold." My mouth went dry. March 2018. I tried to remember. Had I picked someone up 3 years ago? The dates were fuzzy, years of drives blending together, but I couldn't recall anything like that. Nothing that stood out. I don't remember that, I said. You will, he replied, and turned back to stare out the windshield. The temperature in the cab felt wrong now, despite the heater blowing. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather outside was settling into my bones. I wanted to tell him to be quiet, wanted to just drive in silence until I could drop him off somewhere and be done with this. But then he spoke again. You live in Prince George, house on Osprey Street, number 2847. Blue siding, white trim, 2-car garage. But you only use one side because the other is full of your wife's craft supplies. I nearly drove off the road. My hands jerked on the wheel and the truck swerved slightly before I corrected it. How the hell do you know that? Your spare key, he continued, ignoring my question, is in a fake rock beside the propane tank on the north side of the house. You put it there because your wife kept locking herself out when she took the garbage to the curb. He was right. Every word he was saying was correct. The address, the garage, the spare key, details that no one should know unless they'd been watching my house, unless they'd been inside it. Your wife's name is Catherine, he said. She works at the hospital, night shift, 3 days a week. She drives a gray Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper from when she backed into a post at the grocery store parking lot. Stop, I said, my voice coming out harder than I intended. Stop talking. He fell silent, but that smile remained. I could see it in my peripheral vision, that lipless grin that had nothing human behind it. My heart was pounding now. My mind raced through possibilities. Stalker, identity thief, someone who'd broken into my house, gone through my things. But how and why? And how the hell did he know I'd drive past this exact spot tonight? The next rest stop was coming up in about 5 kilometers. I knew it well, a standard BC highway rest area with a parking lot, pit toilets, and a covered picnic area. I'd stop there, tell him to get out, and if he refused, I'd call the police. I had my phone. I'd get a signal eventually. I know what you're thinking, he said suddenly. You're going to stop at the rest area. Tell me to get out, call the RCMP. I didn't respond. Didn't want to confirm what he already seemed to know. They won't find anything, he continued. They'll take your statement. They'll look around, but there won't be anyone to find. The rest stop appeared in my headlights. I pulled off the highway into the parking lot, the truck's tires crunching over gravel and packed snow. The area was empty, no other vehicles, no lights except the single security lamp that barely illuminated the toilet building. I put the truck in park and turned to face him. Get out. He looked at me with those pale, empty eyes. You're making the right choice. This time, get out of my truck. He opened the door and stepped down onto the gravel. The dome light came on again, and in that brief illumination, I saw his face clearly, memorized it. The shape of his jaw, the line of his nose, the way his hair fell across his forehead. If I ever saw this man again, I'd know. He stood there in the parking lot, looking up at me through the open door. The freezing air poured into the cab, but he didn't seem to notice it. See you in 3 years, Mike, he said. Same spot. Then he closed the door and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights and the security lamp. I sat there for a long moment, my hands shaking, before I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course, I was in one of the dead zones. The nearest cell tower was probably 40 kilometers away. I started the truck and drove. Drove fast, faster than I should have, desperate to get to somewhere with people, with lights, with a cell signal. It took me 20 minutes to reach the next town, Burns Lake, and I pulled into the RCMP detachment parking lot and called from there. 2 officers took my statement. They were professional, thorough, asked all the right questions, wrote down the description I gave them of the hitchhiker, noted the details about my house that he'd known. They said they'd increase patrols in my neighborhood, suggested I change my locks and move my spare key. Did you see which direction he went? One of the officers asked. Into the darkness, toward the trees. In this weather? In a denim jacket? Yes. They exchanged a glance. We'll send a car out to check the rest area, but I'll be honest with you, Mr. Richardson, if someone's out there dressed like that, in this cold, they won't last long. They sent a patrol car, found nothing. No footprints beyond where I described him walking. No sign of anyone in the area. No reports of anyone matching that description in the region. I drove home that night, arrived around 3 a.m. Catherine was asleep, her shift not starting until later. I checked every lock on every door and window. Moved the spare key from beside the propane tank to my truck's glove box. Couldn't sleep, just sat in the living room with the lights on, watching the street through the window. Over the next few weeks, I found myself looking over my shoulder, checking the rearview mirror more than necessary. Every time I drove past that spot on the Yellowhead, and I drove past it 3 or 4 times a month, I'd slow down, scan the shoulder, look for that figure standing there with his thumb out. Never saw him again. I told Catherine about it eventually. She wanted me to see someone, talk to a counselor about the anxiety I was clearly experiencing. I went to a few sessions. The counselor suggested it might have been some kind of elaborate scam, someone who'd done research on me, found out personal details, and used them to intimidate me for reasons we couldn't understand. That explanation didn't satisfy me, but I accepted it because I didn't have anything better. The months passed. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter. I kept driving my routes, kept living my life, and slowly, gradually, the memory of that night started to lose its sharp edges. Became something I could almost convince myself I'd exaggerated in my mind. Almost. Then March 2024 arrived. I'd managed to mostly avoid thinking about what he'd said. See you in 3 years. 3 years from March 2021 would be March 2024. But I told myself it was just words. A weird threat from a weird guy. Nothing more. But as March approached, I found myself getting tense again. Sleeping poorly, snapping at Catherine over small things. She asked me what was wrong, and I couldn't explain it. How do you tell someone you're afraid of a date on a calendar? Afraid of a statement made by a stranger 3 years ago? I requested different routes from my dispatcher. Tried to avoid the Yellowhead entirely, but the company was short-staffed, and in the second week of March, I got assigned a Prince George to Prince Rupert run. I almost called in sick. Almost told them I couldn't do it. But what would I have said? That I was afraid of a hitchhiker I'd met 3 years ago? That he'd told me we'd meet again, and I believed him? So I took the route. Left Prince George late in the afternoon, telling myself it would be fine. It was just a highway, just a road I'd driven hundreds of times. The sun set as I approached Vanderhoof. The temperature dropped to -18. The sky was clear and dark, stars visible in that way. They only are in remote places far from city lights. 20 kilometers past Vanderhoof, I saw him. Same spot, same denim jacket, same posture, thumb extended, standing there like he'd been waiting. I didn't slow down, didn't even consider it. I gripped the wheel and pressed harder on the accelerator, blowing past him at 110 kilometers per hour. In the mirror, I saw him turn his head to watch my truck pass. My phone rang. I didn't have it connected to the truck system. It was in my pocket, on silent. Should have been impossible to hear over the engine noise. But I heard it, loud and clear. I pulled it out with shaking hands. Unknown number. I answered. Don't know why. Couldn't help myself. Michael David Richardson, that flat voice said through the phone. You drove past me. I hung up. Threw the phone onto the passenger seat like it was burning. It rang again. I didn't answer. Just drove. Drove as fast as I dared on that dark highway, putting distance between myself and that spot. The phone kept ringing. 15 times. 20. Then it stopped. A text message came through. I shouldn't have looked. Should have just kept driving. But at the next rest stop, a different one. Not the one from 3 years ago. I pulled over and checked it. The message contained a single photo. It was my house, taken from the street. The lights were on inside. Catherine's car was in the driveway. The message had been sent 4 minutes ago. I called Catherine, no answer. Called again, straight to voicemail. I abandoned the truck at the rest stop, got in my personal vehicle. I'd been planning to swap it at Prince Rupert, and drove back to Prince George at speeds that should have gotten me arrested. Made the 3-hour drive in just over 2. Pulled into my driveway. Catherine's car was there, just like in the photo. The house lights were on. I ran inside. Catherine was in the living room, watching television, startled by my sudden entrance. Mike? What are you? You're supposed to be halfway to Rupert by now. I checked every room, every closet, every space, where someone could hide. Nothing. No one. Did anyone come by? Call? Knock on the door? No, it's been quiet. Mike, you're scaring me. What's going on? I couldn't explain it, not in a way that made sense. The RCMP came again when I called them. Same routine as 3 years earlier. Statement taken, description given, no one found. "Mr. Richardson," one of the officers said, "we have your previous report from 2021. This is the same individual." "Yes." "And he's threatening you how exactly?" "He said he'd see me in 3 years. 3 years later, he's at the same spot. He called my phone. He sent me a picture of my house." "We'll investigate." "But sir, if someone knows your phone number and your address, they could easily take a photo of your house and send it to you. That doesn't necessarily mean they were here." They were right. Logically, they were right. But logic didn't explain how he'd been in the exact same spot, wearing the exact same clothes, looking exactly the same as he had 3 years earlier. "It's been 6 months since then. I've taken a leave of absence from the trucking company. Catherine and I are talking about moving, maybe to the island, maybe out of province entirely. But I keep thinking about what he said. See you in 3 years. March 2021, March 2024, March 2027 is coming. And I don't know if moving will make any difference. Because whoever or whatever that man was, he knew things he shouldn't have known, found me when he shouldn't have been able to. And I have the terrible feeling that when March 2027 arrives, it won't matter where I am. He'll find me, same as before. And this time, I don't think I'll be able to drive away." I've driven Highway 97 between Quesnel and Williams Lake more times than I can count. It's a stretch I know as well as the streets of my own neighborhood, every curve, every sight line, every place where the deer like to cross at dusk. I work in forestry management, and that drive is part of my regular route, sometimes twice a week depending on the season. There's a rest stop at kilometer marker 342 that I've used dozens of times over the years. Standard BC highway rest area, nothing special. Gravel parking lot, a couple of picnic tables under a wooden shelter, pit toilets in a small building, an information board with faded maps and wildlife warnings. The kind of place you stop to stretch your legs or use the bathroom before pushing on to your destination. I know that rest stop, knew it I should say, because what I found there last October has made me question whether I ever really knew it at all. It was a Friday night in late October, and I was driving home from Williams Lake later than I'd planned. A meeting had run long, and by the time I got on the road, it was past 11. The highway was empty, just me, and the occasional transport truck heading in the opposite direction. The stretch between Williams Lake and Quesnel is remote, heavily forested on both sides, with minimal light pollution and long gaps between any signs of civilization. On a clear night, the stars are incredible. But that night was overcast, the kind of thick cloud cover that makes the darkness feel absolute. I'd been driving for about 40 minutes when I felt the need to stop. Not urgently, but enough that I knew I should take the opportunity when it presented itself. The rest stop at kilometer 342 was coming up in a few minutes, so I started watching for the sign. The brown provincial rest area marker appeared in my headlights right where it should have been. I signaled unnecessary given the empty highway, but habit and pulled off onto the access road. My headlights swept across the parking area as I turned in, and that's when I first noticed something was off. The picnic tables were green. They'd always been that weathered brown color, the standard stain used by BC parks. But these were green, a dark forest green that looked almost black in my headlights. I pulled into a parking spot, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, trying to remember if the tables had been replaced recently. Maybe the province had updated the rest stop, and I just hadn't noticed. It had been maybe 3 weeks since I'd last stopped here. I got out of the truck, and the second thing that felt wrong hit me immediately. The layout was different. The pit toilet building was on the left side of the parking lot now. It had always been on the right, I was certain of that. I'd used those toilets probably 50 times over the years, always parked in roughly the same spot, always walked to the right to reach them. But now the building sat on the left, and where the toilet should have been on the right, there was just empty gravel and the dark line of trees beyond. I stood by my truck, one hand still on the door, and looked around. The picnic shelter was in the right place, at least centered at the back of the parking area. But there was something else, a fourth building I'd never seen before. It was set back from the parking lot, partially hidden by the picnic shelter from the angle I'd pulled in. A small wooden structure, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with no windows. Just a door that hung slightly crooked in its frame, like it had been built by someone who didn't quite know what they were doing. The wood looked weathered but not ancient, maybe a few years old, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. My first thought was that it must be new maintenance storage. Maybe the province had added it for equipment or supplies. But something about it felt wrong. The crooked door, the lack of windows, the way it sat just slightly too far back from the other structures, like it was trying not to be noticed. I should have just used the bathroom and left. Should have trusted the unease that was building in my chest. But I'm the kind of person who needs to understand things, to have logical explanations. So instead of getting back in my truck, I walked toward the wooden building. The rest stop was completely silent. No wind moving through the trees. No distant traffic sounds. Just the cooling tick of my truck's engine and my footsteps on the gravel. The battery-powered security light that usually illuminated the parking area was either off or missing, I couldn't tell which. My truck's headlights, which I'd left on, provided the only light, and they didn't reach far enough to properly illuminate the wooden structure. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the crooked door. There was no lock, no handle, even just a simple latch, the kind you might find on a garden shed. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave. But I'd come this far, and leaving without knowing what was in there felt worse than looking. I lifted the latch and pulled the door open. It scraped against the frame, the wood swollen from moisture. The smell hit me first, musty, like old camping equipment and unwashed sleeping bags. Then I saw the interior. The space was lit by a battery-powered lantern sitting on an overturned crate. The lantern cast a warm, yellow light that somehow made everything feel worse rather than better. The floor was rough plywood, scattered with sleeping bags, some folded neatly, others spread out as if people had been sleeping on them recently. Food wrappers were piled in one corner, granola bar packages, empty water bottles, the kind of trash that accumulates during long drives. And against the far wall, on another overturned crate, was a notebook. I should have left then, should have backed away from that building and driven straight home. But I stepped inside, drawn by the notebook, and the growing certainty that whatever I was seeing wasn't right. The notebook was the kind you can buy at any gas station, spiral-bound, lined paper, black cover. Someone had written "logbook" on the front in permanent marker. I picked it up, my hands surprisingly steady despite the fear that was coiling tighter in my stomach. I opened to the first page. The entry was dated March 1987, written in careful handwriting. Found the rest stop again. Different location than last time. Stayed the night. Door was unlocked. Heading out at first light. I flipped through the pages. Entry after entry. Different handwriting. Different dates, but the same basic message repeated over and over. Found the rest stop, moved again. Stayed the night. Rest stop not where it should be. Waited until morning. Layout is different. Toilets on wrong side. Spent the night in the wooden building. The dates range from 1987 to just 3 weeks ago. Dozens of entries, maybe more, I didn't count them all. Some were short, just a date and a brief note. Others were longer, more detailed. Many mentioned the fourth building specifically, as if it was a known feature, something people expected to find. As I flipped toward the more recent entries, the tone changed. The handwriting became more frantic, the messages more desperate. It's not where it should be. The highway is different. I can't find my way back. Spent 3 days here. Every time I try to leave, the highway brings me back. Help me. I don't know where I am anymore. The rest stop keeps moving. The last entry was dated October 10th, 12 days ago. It read simply, "Don't stay here. Get out while you can." I dropped the notebook. It hit the plywood floor with a slap that sounded too loud in the enclosed space. My heart was hammering now, my breath coming faster. I backed toward the door, my eyes still on the sleeping bags and food wrappers, seeing them differently now, not just trash left by careless travelers. Evidence of people staying here, people who hadn't left. I got out of the building and walked quickly back to my truck. Not running, something in me refused to run, refused to show that level of fear, but moving fast, my keys already in my hand. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment with the engine running, trying to decide what to do. The logical part of my brain was working overtime, trying to find explanations, some kind of prank, an art project, something explainable. But the rest of me, the deeper, more primitive part that had kept humans alive for thousands of years, was screaming to leave. I put the truck in reverse, backed out of the parking spot, and got back onto the highway heading toward Quesnel. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror. The rest stop was visible in my red taillights, and for just a moment, I could swear I saw someone standing near the wooden building, just a silhouette, motionless, watching me leave. I didn't stop again until I reached Quesnel. Drove straight through, even though my bladder was complaining and my hands were shaking on the wheel. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood what I'd seen, that there was a reasonable explanation. I didn't drive Highway 97 for 2 weeks, made excuses at work, took different routes, avoided that stretch of road, but eventually I had to go back. Had to know if what I'd seen was real or if I'd somehow imagined the whole thing. It was a Wednesday afternoon, bright sunshine, the kind of clear autumn day that makes the interior of BC look like a postcard. I drove toward Williams Lake, watching the kilometer markers, my chest tight with anxiety as I approached 342. The brown rest area sign appeared. I pulled off, my truck crunching over the familiar gravel, and everything was normal. The picnic tables were brown, weathered, in their usual configuration. The pit toilet building was on the right side of the parking lot where it had always been. The picnic shelter was exactly where I remembered it, and there was no fourth building. No wooden structure with the crooked door. Just the 3 standard features of a highway rest stop and the dark line of trees beyond. I got out of my truck and walked around the entire area, checked behind the picnic shelter, looked for any sign that something had been there. Nothing. The ground was undisturbed, covered in the same gravel and packed dirt as the rest of the parking area. If a building had been there, it had left no trace. I used the bathroom, the real bathroom, on the right side where it belonged and got back in my truck. Sat there for a few minutes, looking at the rest stop in the afternoon light, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I'd experienced 2 weeks earlier. I've driven past that rest stop probably 30 times since then. Sometimes I pull in during the day, just to confirm it's still normal, and it always is. Brown picnic tables, pit toilet on the right, no fourth building, everything exactly where it should be. But I've never stopped there at night again, because I don't know what I'd find, and because of something I saw on my last daytime visit about 3 weeks ago. I was walking back to my truck from the picnic shelter when I noticed something carved into one of the wooden posts that supports the roof. It was worn, old, the letters barely visible, but in the right light you could read it. Don't stop here at night. Rest stop moves. 1987. Someone had carved that warning 35 years ago. Someone who had experienced whatever it was I experienced, and they'd felt compelled to leave a message. I think about that notebook sometimes, about the entries spanning decades, about the people who wrote, "I can't find my way back." I wonder if they ever did find their way back, or if they're still there, wherever there is when the rest stop moves. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd accepted the presence of the fourth building, spread out one of those sleeping bags, and tried to sleep until morning. Would I have been able to leave? Or would I have been stuck, like the frantic entries suggested, unable to find the right highway, unable to get home? I drive Highway 97 regularly now. My work requires it, but I plan my trips carefully. Make sure I never need to stop at kilometer marker 342 after dark, because I don't know what that place is at night, don't know where it goes or what rules it follows. I just know that sometimes, when I drive past that rest stop in the darkness, I can see a fourth building in my peripheral vision, just for a second, just at the edge of my headlight beams. A small wooden structure with no windows and a crooked door. And sometimes I see the silhouette of someone standing beside it, watching the highway, waiting for the next person who needs to stop, waiting for someone who won't drive away. I work night shifts at the pulp mill just outside Kamloops, and I've been doing it for going on 8 years now. The money's decent, and I don't mind the quiet. My shift ends at 2 in the morning, and the drive home takes me down Highway 5 through a stretch that most people don't see unless they work hours like mine. It's about 40 minutes of mostly empty road, winding through valleys and pine forests that look black as pitch in the small hours. You might see another vehicle every 10 or 15 minutes if you're lucky. Most nights, it's just me, my headlights, and the yellow line disappearing under my hood. About 6 months ago, I started noticing the same semi-truck behind me on my way home. I remember the first time I really paid attention to it. It was a Wednesday, I think, sometime in July. I just merged onto the highway from the mill access road when I saw headlights appear in my rearview mirror. High up, wide apart, definitely a semi. Nothing unusual about that. Truckers run these routes all hours, hauling goods between Vancouver and the interior. But something made me look twice. The truck was white, plain white. No company name on the cab that I could see. No logos, no markings of any kind. Just a white cab pulling a white trailer, clean and anonymous. I didn't think much of it that first night, but then I saw it again the next night. Same white semi, same distance behind me, maybe 5 kilometers back, maybe a little less. Close enough that I could see it was the same truck, far enough that it didn't feel like tailgating. I remember thinking it was probably just a driver with a regular route, same as me. We were on the same schedule, that's all. Happens all the time out here. But then it was there the next night, and the night after that, and every single night after that for 2 weeks straight, always behind me, always the same distance. I started paying more attention to it, trying to catch details. I couldn't ever make out a license plate, even when we'd pass under the occasional overhead light. The truck looked clean, almost new, but there was something off about it that I couldn't quite name. It was too plain, too unmarked. In all my years seeing trucks on these roads, I'd never seen one without at least a company name or a fleet number somewhere on it. One night, about 3 weeks into this pattern, I decided to test something. I was coming up on a straight stretch where I could see the truck clearly in my mirror. I eased off the gas, let my speed drop from 110 to about 80. I watched the semi in my rear view. Its headlights got a little closer, and then it slowed down too. Matched my speed exactly, maintained that same distance. I sped back up to 120. The semi sped up, same distance. Like we were connected by an invisible rope that couldn't stretch or shrink. My stomach felt cold. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the driver was using me as a pace car, letting me watch for cops or animals on the road. Truckers do that sometimes, but it didn't feel right. There was something too precise about it, too deliberate. A few nights later, I pulled off at a turnout, one of those wide spots on the shoulder where maintenance crews park sometimes. I put on my hazards and waited to see what would happen. The semi's headlights grew larger in my mirror as it approached. I was sure it would pass me. That's what any normal driver would do. But it didn't. It slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder about 100 meters behind me, and stopped. Just sat there with its lights on, engine idling. I could hear the low rumble of it even with my windows up. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. The truck didn't move, didn't flash its lights, didn't pull forward or back. Just waited. I kept glancing between my side mirror and rear view mirror, trying to see if anyone got out, trying to see any movement in the cab. Nothing. Just those high headlights staring at me through the darkness. After 20 minutes, my nerves were shot. I put my truck in gear, checked my mirrors, and pulled back onto the highway. The semi waited another few seconds, then pulled out behind me, same distance, like nothing had happened. When I got home that night, I didn't tell my wife, Sarah, about it. Didn't want to worry her, and honestly, I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding crazy. What was I going to say? A truck follows me home from work? She'd tell me I was tired, imagining things. Hell, I was starting to wonder that myself. But I knew I wasn't imagining it when I saw it again the next night, and the night after, every single night. Same white semi, same distance, same strange synchronization. I tried varying my speed randomly. It matched me. I tried taking a different route home one night, adding an extra 20 minutes to my drive by going through Barnhartvale. The semi took the same route. I tried leaving work 15 minutes early one night. It was still there. 15 minutes later the next night, still there. I finally reported it to the RCMP after about 2 months of this. I called the non-emergency line and tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. I could hear the skepticism in her voice even as she took down my information. A constable called me back 2 days later. He was polite but not particularly interested. Without a license plate number or company name, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested it was probably just a driver with a similar route and schedule. "These highways aren't that busy at night," he said. "Coincidences happen." But this wasn't a coincidence. I knew it in my bones. There was an intelligence behind it, a purpose. Someone was following me, studying me, and they wanted me to know it. The constable must have heard something in my voice, because his tone softened a little. He said he'd have a patrol car keep an eye on that stretch of highway when they could, but they couldn't dedicate resources to following me home every night. He suggested I try getting a dash cam, maybe catch some footage of the truck. I said I would. I never got the dash cam. Part of me didn't want to confirm what I already knew. Part of me was afraid of what else I might see on that footage. The worst part was the waiting. Every night, about 15 minutes into my drive, I'd start checking my rearview mirror more frequently, my hands tight on the wheel. And then I'd see them, those two high headlights emerging from the darkness behind me, settling into that familiar distance. My heart would start racing, and it wouldn't slow down until I pulled into my driveway and watched the semi continue past on the main road. It always drove past, never stopped, never slowed down in front of my house, just continued on like any truck would, heading to some unknown destination. 3 weeks ago, I took some time off work. First real vacation I'd had in over a year. 3 days, Thursday through Saturday. Sarah and I just stayed home, worked on some projects around the house, tried to relax. I didn't drive Highway 5 at all, didn't think about the semi, tried not to, anyway. It was a relief, honestly, knowing I wouldn't see those headlights in my mirror. Sarah's sister lives in Merritt, about 90 minutes south of us. Saturday night, Sarah drove down to help her with something I can't remember what, some kind of furniture situation. She left around 8 in the evening and said she'd be back by midnight, maybe a little after. I told her to drive safe and didn't think much of it. My phone rang at 3:15 in the morning. I jerked awake, confused, my heart already pounding before I even saw Sarah's name on the screen. I answered, and before I could say anything, she was talking, her voice high and tight with fear. "There's a truck following me," she said. "A semi. It's been behind me for 20 minutes, and it won't pass." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "What highway are you on?" 5. "I'm about 20 minutes from home. I had to stay later than I thought, and there's nobody out here. And this truck it's right behind me, and it's not passing." "What does it look like?" I asked, but I already knew. "It's white, no markings or anything, just white." I tried slowing down to let it pass, but it slowed down too. I'm scared. I was already out of bed, pulling on pants with one hand. "Where are you exactly? Tell me the last landmark you passed." She told me. I knew the spot. "Keep driving," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Stay on the line with me. Don't stop. Just keep going." "What if it tries to make me stop?" Her voice cracked. "It won't. Just keep driving. You're almost home." I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, over the phone. I could hear the hum of her engine, the faint sound of wind, and under it all, I swear I could hear the rumble of a diesel engine that wasn't hers. "It's matching my speed," she whispered. "Exactly. When I speed up, it speeds up when I slow down." "I know," I said. "I know, just keep coming home." "You know? What do you mean you know?" I didn't answer. I was grabbing my keys, heading for the door. "Have you seen this truck before?" she asked, and I could hear she was starting to put it together. "Is this the same route you take home from work?" "Sarah, just focus on driving. You're gonna be fine." But I didn't know that. I had no idea what this thing was or what it wanted. For 6 months, it had followed me, and I told myself it was just some strange coincidence, some weird trucker with nothing better to do. But Sarah had never driven that route before. She didn't work nights. She shouldn't have been on that highway at that time. We'd never even talked about the semi because I'd never told her about it. But it knew about her. I made it to my truck and tore out of the driveway, heading south on Highway 5 to meet her. She was still on the phone, and I could hear her crying now, trying to keep it together. "How much longer?" she asked. 10 minutes, maybe less. I'm coming." It's still there, right behind me, the same distance. It's like it knows exactly where to be. "You're almost home," I repeated. It was all I could think to say. I drove faster than I should have, scanning the northbound lanes for her headlights. And then I saw her. Her little blue sedan appeared over a rise, going maybe 130, and behind her, maintaining that exact same interval that had become sickeningly familiar to me, was the white semi. I caught a glimpse of it as we passed each other. White cab, white trailer, no markings, no numbers, no logos. The cab's windshield was dark. I couldn't see anyone inside. For a moment, as we passed, I had the crazy thought that there was nobody driving it at all. "I just passed you," Sarah said. "I saw you." "I know. Keep going. You're almost there." I hit the brakes, looking for a place to turn around, but the median was concrete barrier for the next kilometer. By the time I found a crossover and got turned around, she was calling again. "I'm in the driveway," she said. "I'm in the driveway. And it's..." "What? Sarah? What?" It just drove past, like normal, like it was just any truck. It didn't slow down or anything. It's gone. I found her sitting in her car in our driveway, doors locked, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I held her while she cried, and she asked me over and over what that was, who was driving that truck, why it had followed her. I had no answers. He still don't. I didn't go back to work after that. Called in sick for a week, then put in for a transfer to day shift. They accommodated me, thank God. I don't drive Highway 5 between 2 and 4 in the morning anymore. I don't know if the semi still runs that route, looking for me, or if it's found someone else to follow. But Sarah has nightmares now. She dreams about headlights in her rearview mirror, always the same distance back, always matching her speed. She wakes up crying, asking me how it knew she would be there that night, how it knew to wait for her. I don't have an answer for that. All I know is that somewhere out there, on the dark highways between Kamloops and Merritt, there's a white semi with no markings that knows things it shouldn't know. And I think about it every night around 2 in the morning, even though I'm safe in my bed now. I think about other people driving that route, checking their mirrors, seeing those high headlights appear behind them. And I wonder who it's following now. I've been driving commercial trucks for 15 years, and for most of that time, my regular route has taken me up and down the Coquihalla Highway between Hope and Merritt. If you're not from British Columbia, you might not know the Cock, but anyone who drives it professionally will tell you it's one of the most unforgiving stretches of highway in the country, especially in winter. The elevation changes are brutal, the grades are steep, and when the snow starts coming down, it doesn't mess around. I've seen jackknife semis, cars in the ditch, whiteout conditions that turn the whole world into a wall of static. You learn to respect that road, or it'll kill you. I know every inch of the Coquihalla, every exit, every brake check, every emergency pullout. I know where the runaway lanes are, where the avalanche zones start and end, which rest stops have the cleanest bathrooms. After 15 years, that highway is like the back of my hand, which is why what happened 2 years ago still doesn't make any sense to me, and probably never will. It was February, middle of the month, and I was hauling a load of construction materials from Vancouver up to Kamloops. The weather forecast had been calling for snow, but nothing I hadn't driven through 100 times before. I left Hope around 6 in the evening, figuring I'd be in Kamloops by 9:30 at the latest. The snow started just past the toll booth. Light at first, just flurries in my headlights. But by the time I was climbing toward the Coquihalla summit, it was coming down hard. I've driven in heavy snow more times than I can count, so I wasn't panicked. I downshifted, kept my speed reasonable, maintained my distance from the few other vehicles on the road, but this storm was building faster than I expected. Within 20 minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. My headlights just reflected back at me off a solid curtain of white. The lane lines disappeared. I was navigating by feel and memory, keeping my truck steady, watching for the faint glow of reflector posts along the shoulder. The smart thing to do in conditions like that is pull over and wait it out. There are chain-up areas and brake checks along the Cock where you can park safely until the plows come through. I was looking for one, checking my mirrors, trying to gauge how bad it was getting, when I saw the exit sign. It appeared out of the snow like a ghost, lit up green against all that white. Cold water services, 1 kilometer. The sign was the standard BC highway style, nothing unusual about it, except I didn't remember a cold water services exit in this section. There's Coldwater Road, sure, but that's further north, and it's not a service area. But I was tired, the snow was getting worse, and I needed to stop. When you see an exit in a storm like that, you take it. I signaled, even though there was nobody behind me, and guided my truck down the off-ramp. The transition was smooth, the ramp well-maintained, snow covering it but not iced over. As I descended, the snow seemed to ease up a little, or maybe I was just getting below the worst of it. The ramp curved gently to the right and opened up into a service area. It was small, nothing fancy. A parking lot big enough for maybe a dozen vehicles, a single-story building that looked like it housed bathrooms and vending machines, and off to one side, a gas station. Everything was lit up, bright sodium lights cutting through the falling snow, illuminating the whole place in this orange-yellow glow. I pulled into the lot and put the truck in park, letting the engine idle, just sitting there for a moment and taking it in. Something felt off immediately, though I couldn't put my finger on what. The place was clean, well lit, clearly operational. The gas station's price sign was illuminated, showing prices that seemed about right. The building's windows glowed with interior light, but there was nobody there. No other vehicles in the lot, no attendant visible in the gas station, no movement anywhere. I've stopped at plenty of service areas in the middle of the night where I was the only customer, so that wasn't unusual by itself. But there was something about the whole setup that struck me as strange. The gas station looked old, like something from the 70s or 80s. The pumps were those tall, rectangular analog ones, with the spinning number wheels behind glass, not the digital pumps you see everywhere now. The building's architecture was dated, too flat roof, big windows, a style that nobody's built in decades. I sat there for a few minutes, watching the snow fall through my headlights, waiting to see if anyone would appear. Nobody did. Finally, I figured I should at least use the bathroom while I had the chance. Maybe grab some coffee and wait for the storm to ease up. I shut down the engine, grabbed my wallet and keys, and climbed out of the cab. The cold hit me immediately. That sharp mountain cold that gets into your lungs. The snow was still coming down, but lighter now, almost gentle. My boots crunched in the fresh powder as I walked toward the main building. Everything was very quiet. No traffic sounds from the highway. No hum of generators or ventilation systems, just the soft whisper of snow and my own breathing. The door to the building was unlocked, and I pushed through into a small vestibule. Immediately, I was hit by that institutional warmth, the kind that comes from baseboard heaters running full blast. There was a hallway leading back to the bathrooms, and a small common area with vending machines and a few molded plastic chairs. Everything was lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. The weird feeling intensified. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but it was all outdated. The floor was that speckled linoleum tile you don't see anymore. The walls were painted a pale yellow that had probably been popular 40 years ago. The vending machines were old models, the kind with mechanical coin slots and pull handles, not digital displays, but they were running, humming quietly, their interior lights showing neat rows of chips and candy bars and drinks. I walked down the hallway to the bathrooms. The men's room was just as strange as everything else. It was spotless, like it had been cleaned within the hour, but the fixtures were ancient, porcelain sinks with separate hot and cold taps, metal stalls with that gap at the bottom you could practically crawl under, one of those old push-button hand dryers that sounded like a jet engine but barely put out any warm air. Even the soap dispenser was the old-fashioned kind, dispensing pink powdered soap that I hadn't seen in years. I used the facilities, washed my hands, and stood there for a moment looking at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, which made sense, but I also looked uneasy, and I couldn't quite explain why. This was just a rest stop, a place to get out of the storm for a bit, but it felt wrong, like I'd stepped into some kind of preserved bubble, a place that time had forgotten or passed by. When I came back out to the common area, I decided to try the vending machines. There was one that advertised hot drinks, coffee, hot chocolate, soup. It was an older model, purely mechanical, with buttons you had to push hard to get them to register. The prices were printed on paper cards, slotted behind plastic. 75 cents for coffee, 85 cents for hot chocolate. No card reader, no digital payment option, just a coin slot. I dug through my pockets and found some quarters and dimes, fed them into the machine, and pressed the button for coffee. The machine whirred and clicked, and a paper cup dropped down. Dark liquid began pouring into it, steaming. When it finished, I retrieved the cup and took a tentative sip. It tasted terrible, burned like it had been sitting in a pot for hours, bitter and acrid. But it was hot, and I needed something to warm me up, so I drank it anyway, standing there in that empty, fluorescent-lit room, listening to the vending machines hum and the hand dryer in the bathroom cycle on and off as its timer ran. I walked over to the windows and looked out at my truck. It sat alone in the parking lot, snow accumulating on its hood and trailer, my tire tracks already filling in. Beyond the lot, I could see the gas station, its lights still on, still apparently open, still completely empty. I couldn't see any other buildings, any other lights, just the service area, sitting by itself, in the middle of a snowstorm. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising. The mountains along the Cock have dead zones everywhere, but my phone also said it was 7:43 p.m., which seemed wrong. I'd left Hope around 6, driven for maybe 40 minutes before taking the exit. It should have been closer to 7, not almost 8. But phone clocks aren't perfect, and I figured I just lost track of time in the storm. I finished the terrible coffee, tossed the cup in a trash can that had a fresh liner, and decided I should probably get back on the road. The snow had definitely eased up, and sitting here in this strange, empty place was starting to make me more nervous than driving in bad weather. There was something deeply unsettling about the silence, the absence of any other people, the sense that I was the only person who had stopped here in years, even though everything was clean and functional. As I walked back to my truck, I glanced over at the gas station again. I could see inside through the big windows. The interior was just as dated as everything else, old-style shelves, a counter with an ancient cash register, and behind it, what looked like cigarette displays and lottery ticket dispensers. But no attendant, no one at all. I climbed back into my cab, fired up the engine, and took a moment to let it warm up while I brushed snow off my mirrors. Then I put the truck in gear and headed back toward what I assumed was the on-ramp to the highway. The service area's exit was clearly marked, leading back up a gradual incline. I followed it up, and within a minute or two, I was merging back onto the Coquihalla. The snow had definitely let up. Visibility was better, and I could see the lane markings again. I settled back into my rhythm, keeping my speed steady, watching the road. Within 20 minutes, I was through the worst of the summit section and starting my descent toward Merritt. The rest of the drive was uneventful, and I made my delivery in Kamloops just after 9:30. The next morning, I called my dispatcher to file my trip report, the way we always do. I mentioned stopping at Coldwater Services to wait out the storm, figuring he'd want to know why my timing was a bit off. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Coldwater Services?" he said. "Where's that?" "On the Cock," I said. "Maybe 20, 30 kilometers past the toll booth. It's a small service area, just a parking lot and bathrooms and a gas station." Another pause. "There's no Coldwater Services on the Coquihalla," he said. "You've got the chain-up area at the summit and the brake check further down, but there's no service exit called Coldwater." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I'm telling you, I stopped there. I took an exit, used the bathroom, got coffee from a vending machine. "Hold on," I heard him typing, clicking his mouse. "Okay, I'm looking at your GPS logs from last night. You left Hope at 6:07 p.m. You show up approaching Merritt at 8:28 p.m. But there's a gap in your track between 7:41 and 8:02. Your truck just doesn't show up on any road during that time." "What do you mean it doesn't show up?" "I mean the GPS tracker shows you on the highway, then you disappear for 21 minutes, then you reappear further up the road, like you jumped forward or something, but there's no record of you taking any exit." I didn't know what to say. I'd been there. I'd walked around, used the bathroom, drank coffee that still left a burned taste in my mouth. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination, but according to the GPS, according to my dispatcher, it hadn't happened. "Maybe the tracker glitched in the storm," I finally said. "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "I've driven the Coquihalla more than 100 times since that night. Every time, I watch for that exit. I know roughly where it should be, based on how far I'd driven before I saw the sign. I've gone through that section in daylight, in clear weather, when I could see everything clearly. There's no exit, no off-ramp, no service area, just the highway, the mountain, and the trees. I've looked at maps, both paper and digital. I've searched online for any mention of Coldwater Services on the Coquihalla. Nothing. The only Coldwater anything in that area is Coldwater Road, which intersects the highway further north, and has nothing resembling what I saw. I've talked to other drivers, guys who've been running that route as long as I have, or longer. Nobody's heard of it, nobody's seen it. A few of them have given me strange looks when I've brought it up, like they think I'm losing it or making things up. But I know what I saw. I know where I stopped. I can still remember the layout of that bathroom, the taste of that coffee, the hum of those old vending machines. I can remember the silence, the way the snow fell through the orange lights, the dated gas pumps with their spinning numbers. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving that stretch of highway, I find myself slowing down slightly, scanning the roadside for that green exit sign. Part of me wants to see it again, to prove to myself that it was real. But a bigger part of me hopes I never do, because I don't know what it means that I found a place that doesn't exist, and I don't know what would happen if I tried to go back. The GPS says I lost 21 minutes that night, but I know I was only stopped for 20 minutes, maybe a little less, which means there's 1 minute I can't account for. 1 minute that happened somewhere else, somewhere that isn't on any map. I still drive the cock, because it's my job, because it's what I know, but I never stop unless I absolutely have to. And when the snow starts falling heavy, when visibility drops and the road disappears, I keep driving, keep pushing through, even when the smart thing would be to pull over and wait. Because I'm afraid if I take another exit in a storm like that, I might end up somewhere I can't find my way back from. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I'm tired and it's late and the highway stretches out empty ahead of me, I think I see a green sign in the distance, appearing out of the darkness. But when I get closer, it's always something else. A reflector post, a distance marker, shadows playing tricks. At least, that's what I tell myself. I drive the Sea to Sky Highway 3 times a week for work, and I've been doing it for going on 4 years now. My company has an office in Whistler, and I make the run-up from Vancouver every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's one of the most beautiful drives in British Columbia. When the weather's good, the ocean on one side, mountains on the other, views that people travel from all over the world to see. But it's also one of the most dangerous highways in the province. The curves are tight, the drop-offs are severe, and in winter, when the rain turns to ice or the fog rolls in thick, it can turn deadly in a heartbeat. I've seen my share of accidents on that highway. Fender benders in the summer when tourists are rubbernecking at the scenery instead of watching the road. Serious crashes in winter when someone takes a curve too fast on black ice. I've seen vehicles in the ditch. I've seen emergency crews working. I've seen helicopters landing to airlift people out. After 4 years, you get used to it in a way, though it never stops being sobering. Every time I pass a crash site, I think about how easily it could be me. What happened last January, though, that's different. That's something I can't explain, something I can't get used to, something that's changed the way I see that highway, and maybe the way I see everything. It was a Wednesday night, middle of January, and I was driving home later than usual. I'd had a meeting that ran long, and by the time I left Whistler, it was already past 10. The weather wasn't great, cold, damp, that kind of coastal winter night where the moisture in the air makes everything feel colder than the temperature would suggest. There wasn't much traffic, which was normal for that time of night. Most of the skiers and snowboarders had already made their way back down to Vancouver hours earlier. I know the Sea to Sky well enough that I can almost drive it on autopilot, but I never actually do. You can't afford to zone out on that highway, especially at night. The curves come quick, and the shoulders are narrow, and beyond the barriers, there's nothing but air and a long drop down to rocks and water. I kept my speed reasonable, stayed focused, watched my mirrors. I was maybe 40 minutes into the drive, somewhere between Britannia Beach and Lions Bay, when I came around a bend and saw the lights. Emergency lights, red and blue, flashing against the rock face on one side and illuminating the guardrail on the other. My stomach tightened the way it always does when I see those lights. I slowed down, moving into the left lane to give the emergency vehicles room. As I got closer, I could see what had happened. A silver SUV had crashed through the barrier on the ocean side of the highway. It was a Honda CR-V, and it had gone partway over the cliff, the front end angled down toward the drop, the rear wheels still on the pavement. The whole vehicle was tilted at a sickening angle, held in place by what was left of the barrier and maybe by sheer luck. Emergency crews were everywhere, firefighters, paramedics, RCMP officers. They had floodlights set up, and in the harsh white light, I could see how bad it was. A police officer was directing traffic, waving vehicles through one at a time. As I crept past, I got a clear look at the CR-V. Silver, maybe 5 or 6 years old. There was a distinctive roof rack on top, one of those black aluminum ones with crossbars. And on the rear bumper, on the driver's side, there was a dent, a specific crease in the metal that caught the light. I noticed it because it was exactly the kind of dent you'd get from backing into a pole or a post, a perfect horizontal line. I couldn't see if anyone was still in the vehicle. The emergency crews were working around it, and there was an ambulance parked up ahead with its rear doors open. I hoped whoever had been driving had gotten out, had survived, but I couldn't tell. The officer waved me through, and I continued down the highway, leaving the scene behind. I thought about it on and off for the rest of the drive home. Wondered how it had happened, whether the driver had been going too fast, whether they'd hit ice or swerved to avoid an animal. Wondered if they were okay. You always wonder those things when you pass an accident, especially a bad one. By the time I got home, it was after 11, and I was tired. I went to bed thinking about that silver CRV hanging over the cliff, and I said a small prayer, even though I'm not particularly religious, that whoever had been in it had survived. The next morning was Thursday, but I had to drive up to Whistler anyway for an unexpected meeting. My boss had called early, asking if I could come in to handle something urgent. So I grabbed coffee, got on the road by 7:30, and headed north on the sea to sky. It was a completely different drive in daylight. Clear skies, sunshine, the ocean sparkling blue-green below. The mountains still had fresh snow on them from a storm earlier in the week, and everything looked clean and beautiful. Traffic was light, mostly locals and a few early bird skiers heading up. I settled into the drive, radio on, coffee in my cup holder, not thinking about much of anything. I came around that same bend from the night before, the one where I'd seen the accident, and I glanced over at the barrier, curious to see if there was still damage, if maybe crews were still working. The barrier had been partially repaired. I could see fresh metal and new posts, but the scene was clear. No emergency vehicles, no debris. They'd cleaned it up overnight, which made sense. And then I saw the silver Honda CRV. It was maybe 50 meters ahead of me, driving in the right lane, going slightly under the speed limit. My first thought was just a casual observation, same model as the one from last night. But then I got closer, and I could see the roof rack. Black aluminum, crossbars, exact same style. My hands tightened on the wheel. Coincidence, I told myself. Lots of people have CRVs, lots of people have roof racks. But then I got close enough to see the rear bumper, and my heart started pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. There was a dent on the driver's side, a horizontal crease in the metal, exactly where I'd seen it the night before. Exactly the same. I eased off the gas, letting the distance between us grow. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. It couldn't be the same vehicle. The one from last night had gone over the cliff, or nearly had. It would have been totaled, impounded, definitely not back on the road 12 hours later. But that dent, that specific dent, and the roof rack, the color, everything was identical. I could see the driver now, or at least their silhouette. They looked small, maybe a woman or a slight man, but I couldn't make out details. They were driving carefully, staying in their lane, going maybe 10 kilometers under the limit. Normal driving. Nothing erratic, nothing that would suggest they were in danger. I kept following, maintaining my distance, my mind trying to work through what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe there were two silver CRVs with the exact same dent and roof rack. It was possible. Unlikely, but possible. But something in my gut was screaming that this was wrong, that I was seeing something I shouldn't be seeing. We continued north, following the curves of the highway. I watched the CRV's brake lights come on before each turn, watched them accelerate gently coming out of the curves. Everything normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread building in my chest. I kept thinking about the accident from the night before, kept seeing that vehicle tilted over the cliff, held by a few pieces of twisted metal. We were approaching the spot now, the exact location where I'd seen the crash. I recognized the curve, the specific section of guardrail. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I don't know what I expected to happen, but every nerve in my body was firing, telling me something was wrong, something was about to happen. The CRV entered the curve. I held my breath. And then, with no warning at all, the vehicle swerved. It wasn't a gradual drift or a skid. It was a sudden, violent swerve to the right, like the driver had jerked the wheel. The CRV shot across the right lane, hit the barrier with a sickening crunch of metal, and went through. Just went through, like the barrier was paper. The rear end lifted as the front went over, and then the whole vehicle was gone, disappeared over the cliff edge. I slammed on my brakes, my tires squealing, my truck fishtailing slightly before I got it under control. I pulled over onto the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out of my pocket. I dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I told the dispatcher there had been an accident. A vehicle had gone over the cliff. I gave them the approximate location. The dispatcher asked if anyone was injured, if I could see the vehicle. I got out of my truck and walked to the edge, to the gap in the barrier where the CRV had gone through. I looked down, expecting to see the vehicle crashed on the rocks below, but I couldn't see it. The drop was steep, the cliff face jagged, and far below I could see water and rocks, but no vehicle. The angle was wrong, or it had gone too far, or something. I couldn't see it. I told the dispatcher I couldn't see the vehicle, but it had definitely gone over. She said emergency services were on the way, told me to stay on the line, stay safe, don't try to climb down. I stood there on the shoulder, my heart still racing, staring at that gap in the barrier, and all I could think was that I had just watched someone die. The emergency vehicles arrived within 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Fire trucks, ambulance, RCMP, the same crew I'd seen the night before, or at least similar vehicles. They cordoned off the area, and an officer came over to take my statement. He was young, maybe late 20s, professional and calm in that way police officers are. I told him what I'd seen. I was driving behind the CRV. It swerved suddenly, went through the barrier, went over the cliff. He took notes, asked questions. Had the driver seemed impaired? Had there been other vehicles? Had I seen brake lights before the swerve? I answered everything as clearly as I could, but my mind was somewhere else. The officer looked up from his notes. "And you're sure about the time this happened? About 20 minutes ago?" "Yes," I said. "Maybe 25 now." He nodded, then looked over at the barrier, at the gap. "And the vehicle definitely went over?" "Yes, I saw it. Silver Honda CRV." Something changed in his expression, just slightly. "You're sure it was a CRV?" "Positive. Silver, with a roof rack. There was a dent on the rear bumper, driver's side." The officer exchanged a glance with another officer who had walked over. They had a brief, quiet conversation I couldn't quite hear. Then the first officer turned back to me. "Sir, we responded to an accident at this exact location last night around 11 p.m. Silver Honda CRV went through the barrier, same description you just gave." My mouth went dry. "I know," I said. "I drove past it last night. I saw the emergency crews." Both officers were staring at me now. "You saw the accident last night," the first officer said slowly, "and you just saw what you believe is the same vehicle crash in the same place this morning." I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it. How could I explain it? That I'd seen the vehicle from last night's accident driving ahead of me this morning, that I'd followed it, that I'd watched it crash in the exact same spot? They'd think I was insane, or lying, or confused. "I saw an accident here last night," I said carefully. "And I saw an accident here this morning. I don't know if they're connected." The officer studied me for a long moment, then wrote something in his notebook. "We're going to need you to wait here while we investigate. Someone may have more questions for you." I waited for another hour while they worked. They brought in a helicopter to search the cliff face and the water below. They examined the barrier, took photographs, made measurements. I stood by my truck, watching, trying to understand what I'd witnessed. Eventually, a different officer came over, an older man with gray hair and sergeant stripes. "Mr. Chen," he said, "we've completed our preliminary investigation. We can't find any evidence of a vehicle going over the cliff this morning. No debris, no skid marks beyond what was left from last night's accident, no oil, nothing." I stared at him, but I saw it. I watched it go over. "I believe you saw something," he said, not unkindly. "But we've got helicopter footage of the entire cliff face and the shoreline. There's no vehicle down there from this morning. The only vehicle we've recovered is from last night's accident, and that was pulled up around 4 a.m. "What about the driver?" I asked. "From last night, did they survive?" The sergeant's expression darkened. "The driver from last night's accident was killed on impact. She was pronounced dead at the scene." The driver was a woman. I thought about the silhouette I'd seen in the CRV this morning, small and slight. "Can you tell me anything about her?" I asked. The sergeant hesitated, then seemed to decide it didn't matter. "Her name was Jennifer Kwan, 34 years old, lived in Vancouver, worked in Whistler. She drove this route regularly for work. 3 times a week," I thought. just like me. They let me go eventually, though the sergeant suggested, very politely, that I might want to talk to someone, that witnessing an accident can be traumatic, can play tricks on your memory. I nodded and said I'd think about it, and then I drove the rest of the way to Whistler in a daze. I still drive the sea to sky 3 times a week. I still come around that bend, past that section of barrier that's been repaired and repaired again. And sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, I'll see a silver Honda CR-V ahead of me, and my heart will start to pound, and I'll slow down, let it get ahead of me, watch it take that curve. So far, every one of them has made it through safely, but I can't help thinking about Jennifer Kwan, about whether she saw something the night before her accident, whether she got a glimpse of what was coming and didn't understand it until it was too late. And I wonder, late at night when I'm making that drive home, whether someday I'll come around a bend and see my own truck crash through a barrier, emergency lights flashing, whether I'll watch myself die, and whether the next morning I'll get behind the wheel anyway. Because what else can you do when you've seen your own future and there's no way to change it? I don't talk about what I saw that morning. Who would believe me? I barely believe it myself. But every time I drive past that spot, I think about Jennifer Kwan driving to work on what she thought was just another Thursday morning, not knowing she'd already died the night before. And I think about how thin the line is between one moment and the next, how maybe time isn't as straight and simple as we think it is, and how sometimes, for reasons we'll never understand, we get a glimpse of what's coming. Whether that's a mercy or a curse, I still haven't decided. I'm a social worker, and for the past 6 years, my job has taken me up and down Highway 16, between Prince George and Prince Rupert. If you're not from British Columbia, you might not know Highway 16, but if you are, you know its other name, the Highway of Tears. They call it that because of the women who've gone missing along this route, Indigenous women mostly, dozens of them over the decades. Some have been found, many haven't. It's a stretch of road that carries weight, that carries memory, and everyone who drives it regularly feels that weight, whether they admit it or not. I drive it because I have to. The communities I serve are spread out along that highway, remote places where people need support, need resources, need someone to show up and actually give a damn. Most of my colleagues won't take the northern route. They'll find reasons to stay in Prince George, to work the communities closer to town. But somebody has to make the drive, and I've never been one to shy away from hard things. So 3, sometimes 4 times a month, I load up my truck and make the run. During the day, Highway 16 is beautiful in that stark northern way. Dense forest on both sides, mountains in the distance, the occasional lake flashing silver through the trees. But at night, it's different. The darkness up here isn't like city darkness. There are stretches where you won't see another vehicle for an hour, where your headlights are the only light for miles in any direction. The cell service comes and goes, mostly goes. You're alone out there in a way that most people never experience, and you feel it in your bones. I'd gotten used to the isolation, the darkness, the knowledge that I was driving a road where terrible things had happened. You have to make peace with it, or you can't do the job. But there's one thing I've never gotten used to, and that's the fog. It comes up suddenly, especially in certain sections, especially near Burns Lake. One minute you're driving under clear skies, stars visible through the windshield, and the next minute you're in a wall of white, so thick you can barely see 10 feet ahead. It rolls across the highway in banks, low to the ground, and when you hit it, the temperature drops, and everything becomes muffled and close. What happened last summer? That's something different. That's something I still can't explain, something that's changed the way I see that highway, and maybe the way I see the world. It was late July, and I was driving back to Prince George after spending 2 days in Smithers. It had been a rough trip, the kind where you deal with situations that stick with you, and I was tired in that deep, bone-tired way that comes from carrying other people's trauma. I'd left later than I intended, and by the time I was approaching Burns Lake, it was well past midnight. The night was clear, unusually so for that time of year. The moon was nearly full, and I could see the tree line clearly on both sides of the highway. There was no traffic, which was normal for that hour. Just me, my headlights, and the yellow line unspooling beneath my tires. I had the radio on low, some CBC program I wasn't really listening to, more for the comfort of voices than anything else. The fog came up without warning, the way it always does. One moment I was driving through clear air, and the next I was enveloped in white. It was dense, the kind of fog that seems to have substance, that presses against your windshield. I slowed down automatically, down to maybe 60 kilometers per hour, my hands tightening on the wheel. Fog like this could hide an animal on the road, could hide anything. I'd been driving through the fog bank for maybe 5 minutes when I first saw it. At first, I thought it was just a thicker patch of fog, a denser swirl in the mist ahead, but as my headlights hit it, I realized it had structure. It had form, and then I realized it had features. There was a face in the fog. Not a trick of light, not pareidolia where your brain finds patterns that aren't there. An actual face, massive, maybe 20 feet across, formed entirely of fog, but distinct and unmistakable. I could see eyes, large and dark, somehow darker than the surrounding mist. I could see a nose, a mouth, the suggestion of cheekbones. The features were crude, not human exactly, but definitely face-like, and it was looking at the road. Looking at me, my foot came off the gas, and I slowed to maybe 40 kilometers per hour. My heart was pounding, and my first thought was that I was hallucinating, that exhaustion had finally caught up with me, and I was seeing things. But the face didn't waver or dissolve. It stayed solid, stayed present, as real as anything I'd ever seen. I kept driving, slowly now, approaching the face. I couldn't turn around, there was nowhere to go, and stopping on the highway in thick fog seemed more dangerous than continuing forward. As I got closer, I could see more details. The eyes were watching, focused on the road ahead, and there was an intelligence in them that made my skin crawl. The mouth was slightly open, not threatening exactly, but not friendly either, just open, as if the face was breathing or about to speak. And then, as I drew level with it, the face moved. It turned its head slowly, following my truck as I passed. I watched it in my peripheral vision, too afraid to look directly, too afraid to look away. The eyes tracked my movement, the whole massive face rotating to keep me in view. I could see the features shift as it moved, the fog swirling and reforming but maintaining that face-like structure. It was like watching something alive, something aware. I pressed harder on the gas, accelerating to 60, then 70. The fog was still thick, and I knew I was driving too fast for conditions, but I didn't care. I needed to get away from that thing, needed to get out of the fog bank. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I could feel sweat running down my back despite the cold. The road curved slightly, and I followed it, still accelerating. I glanced in my rearview mirror and immediately wished I hadn't. The face was still there, visible in my taillight's red glow, still turned in my direction. And its mouth had opened wider, much wider, as if it was calling out or trying to say something. I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my engine and the blood rushing in my ears, but I could see that mouth moving, see the fog swirling in and out of it. I kept my foot on the gas and my eyes forward, counting the seconds until I emerged from the fog. It felt like forever, but was probably only another minute or two before I burst out into clear air again. The transition was abrupt, like passing through a curtain. One moment I was surrounded by white, and the next I was under open sky, the moon bright overhead, the stars visible. I looked in my rearview mirror again. The fog bank sat behind me, a solid wall of white stretching across the highway. And there, at the edge visible in my taillights, was the face, still watching, still oriented toward me, its mouth still open. I didn't slow down until I was 5 kilometers past the fog, until I physically couldn't see it in my mirrors anymore. When I finally did slow to a reasonable speed, my hands were cramping from how hard I'd been gripping the wheel, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I drove the rest of the way to Prince George in a state of numb shock, my mind trying to process what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it. Fog could form patterns, I knew that. Wind could shape it, temperature variations could create pockets and swirls. But what I'd seen wasn't random. It had been deliberate, aware, tracking me as I passed. And that mouth, opening wider, as if trying to call me back. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That I'd seen a face in the fog, a massive face that had watched me drive by? They'd think I was exhausted, hallucinating, making things up. I half thought that myself, but I couldn't shake the memory of it. The way those eyes had focused on me, the way the head had turned to follow, the mouth opening wider and wider in my rearview mirror. I took a week off work, told myself I needed a break, needed to rest. But when I went back to driving Highway 16, The dread started building as soon as I left Prince George. Every time I approached Burns Lake, especially at night, my hands would tighten on the wheel and my heart would start racing. The first few trips after that night were clear, no fog at all. I started to convince myself it had been a one-time thing, a strange coincidence, a trick of exhaustion in headlights. But then, about a month later, I hit another fog bank in almost the same location. It was just after 1 in the morning, and the fog rolled across the highway suddenly, thick and low. I slowed down, my stomach knotting with anxiety, and I peered into the white, looking for shapes, for patterns, for a face. I saw it almost immediately. The same massive face, maybe in a slightly different position but unmistakable. The eyes watching the road, the mouth slightly open. I kept driving, faster than I should have, watching it in my peripheral vision. And just like before, as I passed, the head turned to follow me. The features shifted in the fog, maintaining their shape, tracking my movement. This time, I didn't look back in my rearview mirror until I was well clear of the fog. I couldn't bear to see that mouth opening again. It's happened 4 more times since then. Not every time I drive through fog on Highway 16, but enough times that I know it's not random, not coincidence. The face is there, in those fog banks near Burns Lake, and it watches. Sometimes it's in slightly different positions, sometimes the features look a little different, but it's always the same basic form, always watching, always turning its head to follow vehicles as they pass. I've tried to research it, carefully, not wanting to sound crazy. I've looked into indigenous legends from the area, stories about spirits and fog and the highway. There are stories, of course, stories about the women who've gone missing, about the feeling of being watched on that road, about things in the forest that don't have names, but nothing specifically about a face in the fog, nothing that matches what I've seen. I've thought about reporting it, about calling someone official, but who would I call? The police? The highway department? And say what, exactly? That there's a face made of fog that watches drivers near Burns Lake? They'd think I was insane or wasting their time. I've started taking different routes when I can, adding hours to my trips to avoid that section of highway at night. But sometimes there's no choice. Sometimes I have to drive it, and when I do, I watch for the fog with a dread that sits heavy in my chest. The worst part isn't seeing the face anymore. I've almost gotten used to that, in the way you can get used to anything if it happens enough times. The worst part is wondering what it wants, why it's there. Is it watching for someone specific? Is it waiting? Is it one of the missing women, transformed into something else, bound to that highway forever? Or is it something older, something that's always been there, that's watched countless people drive past over the decades? And the mouth, always opening wider in my rearview mirror, always looking like it's trying to say something or call out. What is it trying to say? Is it a warning, a plea, or is it trying to call me back, to make me stop, to make me turn around? I've seen it 6 times now. 6 times that massive face has turned to watch me pass. 6 times I've seen that mouth open wider as I drive away. And each time, I wonder if this is the time I'll understand what it wants, or if this is the time I'll stop and turn around, unable to resist the pull any longer. Other drivers must see it too, I think. They must. That highway is too busy, even at night, for me to be the only one. But nobody talks about it, or if they do, I haven't heard. Maybe they think they're seeing things. Maybe they convince themselves it was just fog and shadows and tired eyes. Maybe some of them stop, pulled by that open mouth, and we never hear from them again. I still drive Highway 16. I still do my job, visit the communities that need me. But every time I approach Burns Lake at night, every time I see fog rolling across the highway, something cold settles in my stomach, and I grip the wheel tighter, and I tell myself I won't look, I won't acknowledge it, I'll just drive through and keep going. But I always look. I can't help it, and it's always there, watching, waiting, its mouth open, as if there's something it desperately needs to tell me. And someday, I'm afraid I'm going to stop and listen. Someday, that open mouth is going to call me back, and I won't be able to resist anymore. I'll pull over, I'll walk back into the fog, and I'll finally hear what it's been trying to say all this time. And I think about all those missing women, all those people who drove this highway and never made it home, and I wonder how many of them saw the face too. I wonder how many of them stopped. I wonder if they're still there, somewhere in that fog, trying to warn the rest of us, or trying to call us to join them. I'm a wildlife biologist, and my work takes me all over northern British Columbia, tracking animal populations, studying migration patterns, collecting data in some of the most remote places in the province. Most people think my job is all about the animals, and it is, but what they don't understand is that it's also about the driving. Long, lonely stretches of highway through country so empty you can go hours without seeing another soul. Highway 37 North is one of my regular routes, running from Kitwanga up through the Cassiar region toward the Yukon border. It's a road that tests you, especially in winter, especially at night. I've always kept the radio on when I drive these routes. It's company, mostly, a voice in the darkness to remind you that there's still a world out there beyond your headlights. Usually I listen to CBC or whatever local station I can pick up, though the signal comes and goes as you move through the mountains. Sometimes it's country music, sometimes it's talk radio, sometimes it's indigenous programming from one of the First Nations stations. I'm not picky. Any voice is better than silence. What happened 3 months ago started like any other night drive. I'd spent 4 days tracking wolf populations near Telegraph Creek and was heading back south toward Smithers, a drive that would take me most of the night. I'd left around 8 in the evening, planning to drive straight through and arrive by dawn. The weather was clear but cold. Mid-November, the kind of cold that makes the stars look sharp enough to cut yourself on. I had CBC on for the first hour, listening to some documentary about climate change, but as I got further north, the signal started breaking up, fading in and out until it was more static than voice. I spun the dial, looking for something clearer, passing through empty frequencies and fragments of stations too distant to hold. And then, around 97.3 FM, I found something. It was a male voice, calm and measured, speaking clearly with no music, no jingles, no identification. Just the voice, delivering what sounded like traffic reports. Highway 37 North, current conditions. The voice said, light snow at kilometer 310, road surface wet but not icing, temperature dropping, exercise normal caution. I glanced at my odometer. I was at kilometer 290, heading north. The report was accurate, timely, relevant to exactly where I was. I figured I'd stumbled onto some local highway information station, maybe something run by the provincial road maintenance crews. It was useful information, so I left it on. The voice continued every few minutes with updates. Kilometer 325, frost forming on bridges. Reduced speed on elevated sections. Kilometer 340, rockslide cleared but debris on shoulder. Use caution. Each report was specific, detailed, and perfectly timed to reach me just before I hit the area being described. It was almost unnervingly helpful. I listened for about an hour, following the voice's advice, slowing for frost, watching for debris. The voice never identified the station, never gave call letters or weather sponsored by anyone. Just information, delivered in that same calm, professional tone. There was something about the voice itself that was hard to pin down. It sounded human, but also somehow flat, lacking the small imperfections and variations that real human speech has. But I was tired, and I was grateful for the information, so I didn't think much about it. Then, around kilometer 370, the voice said something different. Vehicle approaching from behind at high speed. Recommend moving to shoulder in 2 kilometers. I immediately checked my rearview mirror. The highway behind me was dark, empty, my taillights reflecting red on the pavement. I couldn't see any headlights, nothing approaching, but something about the voice's tone made me listen. It hadn't been a suggestion, it had been a recommendation, delivered with the same calm certainty as all the other reports. 2 kilometers ahead, I pulled onto the shoulder and slowed to a stop. My hazards on, my hands tight on the wheel. I felt foolish, sitting there on the side of a dark highway because a radio voice had told me to. I kept watching my mirrors, wondering if I should just get back on the road. And then I saw the headlights. They appeared suddenly, coming over a rise behind me, and they were moving fast, very fast. Within seconds, I could hear the engine, a deep roar that grew louder and louder. A massive pickup truck, jacked up on oversized tires, came screaming past me doing at least 150 kilometers per hour, maybe more. It was weaving between lanes, crossing the center line, completely out of control or completely uncaring. If I'd been in the right lane where I'd been driving, it would have hit me, no question. At that speed, with that mass, it would have killed me. I sat there on the shoulder, my heart hammering, watching the truck's taillights disappear into the distance. My hands were shaking. The voice on the radio continued, calm and measured. Highway 37 north, kilometer 380. Road clear, conditions normal. I tried to change the station, to find some identification, some explanation for what had just happened. But the dial didn't respond the way it should. No matter where I turned it, I still heard the same voice, the same frequency. It was as if the radio had locked onto this station and wouldn't let go. I took a few deep breaths, tried to calm down, and pulled back onto the highway. The voice had saved my life. That was clear. But how had it known? How could it have known a vehicle was approaching at high speed behind me when I couldn't see any headlights, when there was no way to predict that? I kept driving, more shaken than I wanted to admit. The voice continued with its reports. Kilometer 390, bridge surface may be slippery. Reduce speed. Kilometer 405, wildlife active in area. Watch for movement at road edges. Standard information, useful but not extraordinary. Then, around kilometer 375, the voice said, recommend stopping at kilometer 380. Moose on highway in 17 minutes. I looked at my clock. It was 11:43 p.m. 17 minutes would be exactly midnight. I checked my odometer. I was at kilometer 376, so kilometer 380 was just ahead. The voice's tone hadn't changed, still calm and professional, but something about the specificity of it made my skin prickle. Not moose possible in area or watch for wildlife. A moose, on the highway, in exactly 17 minutes. I could have kept driving. Part of me wanted to, but the voice had been right about the truck, had saved my life by being right. So when I reached kilometer 380, I pulled over again, onto a wide spot on the shoulder, and I waited. The night was quiet, just the tick of my cooling engine and the faint hum of the radio. The voice had gone silent after the moose warning. No more updates, just a faint carrier signal that told me the station was still broadcasting. I sat there in the dark, watching the road ahead, feeling increasingly foolish. Moose cross highways all the time up here, but the odds of one crossing at this exact spot at this exact time were astronomical. I checked my clock, 11:52, 8 minutes to go. I turned off my headlights to save the battery and to see better into the darkness. The stars were incredible, the Milky Way visible as a river of light overhead. The forest on both sides of the highway was black and dense, the kind of darkness that feels absolute. 11:57, 3 minutes. I was starting to think about leaving, about feeling like an idiot for sitting on the side of a highway in the middle of nowhere, because a radio voice had told me to. And then, at exactly midnight according to my clock, I saw movement. A massive bull moose stepped out of the forest on the left side of the highway. Even in the darkness, I could see how big it was, could see the enormous span of its antlers. It moved with that deliberate, unhurried gait that moose have, like nothing in the world could make it rush. It crossed the right lane, then the center line, then the left lane, and disappeared into the forest on the other side. I sat there, my mouth dry, my hands cold despite the heater running. The voice on the radio had known, not just that there would be a moose, but exactly when, exactly where, 17 minutes in advance, predicted to the minute. I reached for the radio dial, my hand shaking slightly, and tried to tune away from the station. This time, it worked. The voice cut off mid-silence, and I found static, then fragments of a country station from somewhere far away. I spun back to 97.3, trying to find the voice again. Nothing but static. I tried every frequency on the FM band, then the AM band. Nothing. The station was gone, like it had never existed. I drove the rest of the way to Smithers in a state of numb confusion, my mind trying to work through what had happened. A radio station that gave impossibly accurate predictions about immediate future events. A voice that had saved my life and then proven it could see 17 minutes into the future with perfect accuracy. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I spent the morning searching online for any information about a traffic station on Highway 37, about emergency broadcast systems, about anything that could explain what I'd heard. Nothing. Highway 37 doesn't have a dedicated traffic station. The Provincial Highway Information System doesn't broadcast on FM radio. There was no explanation. I've driven Highway 37 dozens of times since that night. Every time, I scan through the radio frequencies, looking for 97.3, looking for that voice. I've tried at different times of day, in different weather, at different points along the highway. I've recorded the static on my phone, hoping maybe there's something hidden in it that I'm not hearing. Nothing. Just empty frequencies and distant stations. I've talked to other people who drive that highway regularly, truckers and biologists and maintenance workers. I've been careful about how I ask, not wanting to sound crazy, just casually mentioning if they've ever picked up an unusual station giving traffic reports. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. Most of them just stream their own music or podcasts. The few who still use radio have never heard anything like what I described. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was more tired than I realized, and I hallucinated the whole thing, but I wasn't that tired. And hallucinations don't warn you about speeding trucks that then appear exactly as predicted. Maybe it was some kind of emergency test broadcast, some automated system I happened to catch during a trial run. But that doesn't explain the 17-minute warning about the moose, doesn't explain the impossible accuracy. The thing that bothers me most isn't that I found the station. It's that the station found me. I've driven Highway 37 dozens of times over the past 5 years, and I'd never heard that voice before that night. Why then? Why when I was alone on a dangerous highway at night, when I was in a position where those warnings could save my life? And the specificity of it. Not general warnings about wildlife or dangerous drivers, but specific predictions timed to reach me exactly when I needed them. Vehicle approaching from behind at high speed, 2 kilometers before it reached me, giving me just enough time to get off the road. Moose on highway in 17 minutes, at exactly the right location. As if something was watching my route, monitoring my progress, calculating what I needed to know and when I needed to know it. I've thought about going back, about driving that exact route at the same time of night, seeing if the station appears again. Part of me wants desperately to find it, to hear that voice again, to understand what it was and how it knew those things. But a bigger part of me is afraid to, because what if it appears again? What if it gives me another warning, another impossible prediction? What would that mean about the nature of the world, about the things that exist in these empty places that most people never see? Or worse, what if it doesn't appear? What if I drive that route alone at night without the voice to guide me, without warnings about what's ahead? I've gotten used to driving that highway since that night, but I'm always listening now, always aware that I'm navigating it without help, without that calm voice telling me what's coming. I think about all the other people who drive these remote highways at night, all the truckers and travelers and workers moving through the darkness. I wonder if the voice finds them too, if they hear those warnings and follow them without understanding what's really happening, or if I was special somehow, chosen for reasons I'll never understand. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving Highway 37, I'll spin through the radio frequencies one more time, hoping to hear that measured, professional tone. And in the static between stations, in those moments of white noise and carrier waves, I swear I can almost hear something. Not quite words, not quite a voice, but something that sounds like it could be both. Something that sounds like it's still out there, still broadcasting, still watching the highway and the people who drive it. And I drive with one hand on the wheel and the other near the radio dial, just in case. Just in case the voice comes back and tells me something I need to know. Just in case whatever is out there decides I need saving again. Because I think about that moose, about 17 minutes of perfect prediction, and I realize that whatever warned me that night knew more than just what was about to happen. It knew what needed to happen. It knew I needed to stop, needed to wait, needed to see that moose cross the highway at exactly midnight. And I don't know if that was a demonstration or a message or a test, but I know that something on Highway 37 that night was watching out for me, and I don't know if that makes me feel safer or more afraid. I drive medical supply runs between Vancouver and remote communities in northern British Columbia, and I've been doing it for almost 7 years. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary. These communities need their medical supplies, and someone has to get them there. The routes are long, the roads are often rough, and to make the delivery schedules work, most of my driving happens at night. I've gotten used to it over the years, the darkness, the empty highways, the hours alone with nothing but my headlights and the road. Highway 97 through the Caribou is one of my regular routes, and it's usually quiet after midnight. You might see another vehicle every hour, maybe 2 if it's busy. Mostly it's just truckers like me, making the long haul between Vancouver and Prince George, or locals heading home from late shifts. The road itself is decent, well-maintained, with enough straight sections that you can make good time if the weather cooperates. What started happening about a month ago, I still don't know how to explain it. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to find logical explanations, but nothing fits. Nothing makes sense. It started on a Thursday night in early December. I'd loaded up in Vancouver around 8 p.m. and headed north, planning to make Williams Lake by 3 in the morning and then push on to Prince George by dawn. The weather was clear, cold, but dry, and traffic was light. I made good time through the Fraser Valley and up past Cache Creek, settling into that rhythm you get on long night drives, where the miles blur together and you're operating on autopilot. I was about 20 minutes past 100 Mile House, maybe around 1 in the morning, when I first noticed the headlights. They appeared in my rearview mirror, coming up behind me on a straight stretch. 2 lights, wide set like a truck or SUV, maybe half a kilometer back. Nothing unusual about it. People drive this highway all hours. I kept my speed steady at about 110 kilometers per hour, expecting the vehicle to either catch up and pass or fall behind, the way traffic normally does. But it didn't. After 5 minutes, I checked my mirror again. Still there, same distance. After 10 minutes, still there. After 15 minutes, I started paying closer attention. The headlights maintained an exact distance behind me, maybe 500 meters, never varying. When the road curved, they curved with it. When I went up hills or down into valleys, they matched my movements perfectly. It was like we were connected by an invisible tether that couldn't stretch or shrink. I told myself it was just someone using me as a pace car, following my speed to avoid having to watch their speedometer. Truckers do that sometimes, drafting behind each other to save fuel. But something about it felt off. The distance was too precise, too consistent. After about half an hour, I decided to test it. I accelerated gradually, bringing my speed up to 120, then 130. I watched my mirror. The headlights stayed exactly the same distance back. I slowed down to 90, then 80. The headlights maintained their position. Same distance, like it was measuring the gap with a laser. I felt my stomach tighten. I accelerated again, pushing up to 140 kilometers per hour, faster than I should have been going on that highway at night. The headlights didn't get any closer or farther away, just stayed there, locked in position half a kilometer behind me. I tried to get a better look at the vehicle itself, but I couldn't make out any details. Just the headlights, bright and steady, too far back for my mirrors or my eyes to resolve any body shape or make or model. For all I could tell, it could have been a truck, an SUV, a car with high beams on, just lights, floating in the darkness. The headlights stayed behind me for the next 3 hours. Past Williams Lake, past the turnoff for Quesnel, all the way to the outskirts of Prince George. They never wavered, never varied their distance, never tried to pass. And then, as I approached the city limits where Highway 97 splits and becomes city streets, they simply disappeared. One moment they were there, and the next time I checked my mirror, the road behind me was empty. I completed my delivery in Prince George, grabbed a few hours of sleep in my truck, and started the drive back to Vancouver that afternoon. I kept watching my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the headlights again, but the drive back was normal. Regular traffic, vehicles passing me, and falling behind like they should. Nothing strange. But the next week, when I made the same run at night, it happened again. Same spot, just past 100 Mile House. Headlights appeared in my mirror, settled into that same half-kilometer distance, and followed me for 3 hours. Same exact behavior, same impossible precision. And again they disappeared when I reached Prince George. The third time it happened, I decided to try something different. About an hour into being followed, I pulled over onto the shoulder and stopped completely. Put my truck in park, hazards on, and waited. The headlights behind me slowed down and stopped too, maintaining that same distance. Just sat there, half a kilometer back, lights on, not moving. I waited 5 minutes. Nothing. The lights just stayed there, idling in the darkness. I flashed my high beams a few times, trying to signal, trying to get some kind of response. Nothing. After 10 minutes, I got back on the highway. The headlights pulled back onto the road behind me and resumed following. The fourth time, I tried something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. About 2 hours into being followed, I found a wide pullout and pulled off the highway. But this time, I turned off all my lights, everything. Headlights, running lights, interior lights. I shut off the engine too, sitting there in complete darkness, holding my breath. The headlights behind me turned off too. We sat there in absolute darkness for what felt like forever, but was probably about 10 minutes. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat. The darkness on Highway 97 at 2 in the morning is total, especially when there's no moon. I kept my hand on the key, ready to start the engine if I needed to, my eyes straining to see any movement, any sign of what was out there in the dark. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I started the engine and turned my lights back on, pulling back onto the highway. Within seconds, the headlights behind me came back on too. Same distance, same position, like nothing had happened. I started documenting it after that, writing down the exact times and locations, the exact distance of the lights, everything I could observe. The pattern was consistent. Every time I drove Highway 97 northbound at night, the headlights appeared just past 100 Mile House and followed me until I reached Prince George. Always the same distance, always the same behavior. I tried changing my schedule, leaving at different times, taking different routes when I could. But my delivery schedule is pretty fixed, and there's only so many ways to get to Prince George from Vancouver. And whenever I ended up on Highway 97 at night, the lights appeared. My wife noticed I was getting more stressed, sleeping poorly on my days home. I told her about the headlights, tried to explain how unnerving it was, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Maybe it's just another driver with the same route," she said. "Maybe they like following you because you're a safe driver." I wanted to believe that, but I knew it wasn't true. No human driver could maintain that exact distance for 3 hours straight, not with the variations in speed and terrain. About 2 weeks ago, something changed. I was making a daytime run, leaving Vancouver around noon, planning to reach Prince George by evening. The weather was clear and traffic was moderate. I was approaching 100 Mile House when I glanced in my rearview mirror and felt ice flood my veins. The headlights were there, in broad daylight in the middle of the afternoon. I could see them clearly now, and that somehow made it worse. They were just lights, 2 circular lights with no vehicle attached that I could see. No body, no front end, no windshield. Just headlights, floating half a kilometer behind me, matching my speed on a sunny December afternoon. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, that the sun was playing tricks. But they stayed there, solid and real, 2 lights hanging in the air behind me. I could see through them to the road beyond, like they were translucent. But they were definitely there, definitely following. They followed me for about 30 minutes before they faded away, not disappearing suddenly, but gradually becoming transparent, then vanishing entirely. I pulled over and sat there shaking, trying to understand what I'd seen. Headlights that existed without a vehicle, that could appear in daylight, that seemed to be getting stronger, more present. I called my dispatcher and told him I needed some time off, that I wasn't feeling well. He wasn't happy about it, but he found someone to cover my routes. I've been home for a week now, not driving, trying to figure out what to do. But the thing is, I've started seeing the headlights even when I'm not on Highway 97. 3 days ago, I was driving around town, just running errands in the middle of the day, and I saw them in my rearview mirror. Still half a kilometer back, still maintaining that exact distance. They followed me for about 10 minutes before fading away. Yesterday, they appeared twice. Once in the morning when I was taking my wife to work, and once in the evening when I was coming back from the grocery store. Each time, they lasted a little longer. Each time, they seemed a little more solid, a little more real. And this morning, when I was sitting at the breakfast table, I glanced out the window at my truck parked in the driveway, and I saw them. The headlights were behind my truck, floating in the air about halfway down the block, just sitting there, watching. They stayed for maybe 5 minutes before fading away. My wife thinks I'm having a breakdown, that the stress of the job has finally gotten to me. She wants me to see a doctor, maybe talk to someone, and maybe she's right. Maybe I am losing my mind, but I know what I've seen. I know those headlights are real, and I know they're getting closer. That half-kilometer distance that stayed constant for weeks, it's shrinking now. When they appeared behind my truck this morning, they were only 100 meters away. And each time they show up, they're a little bit closer, staying a little bit longer. I don't know what they want. I don't know what happens if they finally catch up to me, if that distance disappears entirely. Are they trying to reach me, trying to take me somewhere? Or are they just marking me somehow, claiming me? I've thought about going back to Highway 97, about making that drive one more time to see what happens. Maybe if I confront this, if I stop running, I'll get some answers. But I'm terrified of what those answers might be. I'm terrified that if I make that drive again, if I let those headlights follow me one more time, they'll finally close the distance, and I don't know what happens then. My wife asked me this morning what I'm so afraid of. I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain the dread that comes from being followed by something that shouldn't exist, that's been tracking you for weeks, that's getting closer every day? How do you explain the feeling that you're being claimed by something, marked for something, and there's nothing you can do to stop it? I haven't driven in 3 days. I've been staying home, staying off the roads, hoping the headlights will give up, will move on to someone else. But they haven't. They keep appearing, keep getting closer. And I know it's only a matter of time before that distance disappears entirely. Last night, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up, going to the window, looking out at the street. And around 3 in the morning, I saw them. The headlights were at the end of my driveway, maybe 30 meters from my front door. Just sitting there, steady and patient, like they knew I was watching, like they knew I had nowhere left to run. They stayed until dawn, and then they faded away with the sunrise. But they'll be back. They always come back. And each time, they're closer. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened, in case something happens to me. In case one day those headlights finally reach me, and I'm not here anymore to explain. My wife doesn't believe me, and I can't blame her. But I know what I've seen. I know what's been following me down Highway 97 for the past month, what's been getting closer every day. And I know that soon, very soon, there won't be any distance left at all. I've been driving long-haul trucks for 20 years, and Highway 3, between Hope and Princeton, is a route I know as well as I know my own driveway. Every curve, every grade, every settlement and rest stop. It's not the easiest highway. The mountain passes can be brutal in winter, and there are long stretches where you won't see another vehicle for an hour. But it's my route, has been for 2 decades, and I've driven it in every season, every kind of weather, every time of day and night. I know where the towns are. Headley, with its single main street and the old mining equipment displayed like monuments. Manning Park, though that's more of a resort area than a town. A few scattered settlements with names most people have never heard of. Places that exist mainly as highway markers. I know every single one of them, know which ones have decent coffee, which gas stations are open 24 hours, which spots are good for a quick rest when you need to pull over and close your eyes for 15 minutes. That's why what happened last April doesn't make any sense. That's why I've spent the past 8 months questioning my own memory, my own sanity, wondering if exhaustion finally caught up with me after 20 years of night driving. It was a Tuesday night, or Wednesday morning really, sometime in mid-April. I'd picked up a load in Vancouver and was hauling electronics to Calgary, a run I'd made hundreds of times. I left Vancouver around 10 p.m., planning to drive through the night and make Calgary by mid-morning. The weather was clear, which was a blessing for that time of year. Highway 3 can be unpredictable in April. Snow one day and sunshine the next. I made good time through Hope and started climbing into the mountain passes. Traffic was almost non-existent, just me and the occasional transport truck heading the opposite direction. I had the radio on for company, some late-night talk show I wasn't really listening to, just voices to keep me alert. By the time I was about an hour past Hope, it was close to 3 in the morning, and I was starting to feel it. That deep, bone-tired exhaustion that comes from too many nights on the road, too many hours staring at white lines in your headlights. I wasn't dangerously tired yet, not nodding off or anything, but I was thinking about stopping soon. Maybe pull over at a rest area, close my eyes for 20 minutes, grab some coffee from my thermos. That's when I saw the lights. They appeared off to the right, down a side road I didn't remember being there. A cluster of lights, maybe a dozen buildings lit up along what looked like a main street. I slowed down, confused, trying to place where I was exactly. This was a stretch of highway that should have been empty, nothing but forest and mountains for a good 80 kilometers in either direction. But there were the lights, clear as anything. Street lights, building lights, even what looked like neon signs. A town, small but definitely there, sitting just off the highway. There was a turnoff ahead, marked with a standard blue services sign, though I couldn't make out what it said in the darkness. I needed coffee and a bathroom break, and I was curious about this town I'd somehow never noticed before. Maybe it was a settlement I'd always passed during daylight, or when I was focused on the road. Maybe I just never needed to stop there before. I signaled, even though there was nobody behind me, and took the turnoff. The side road was paved but narrow, winding down a gentle slope toward the lights. As I got closer, I could see the town more clearly. It was small, maybe a dozen buildings total, arranged along a single main street. The architecture looked older, like something from the 60s or 70s. Flat-roofed commercial buildings, wide windows, that mid-century style you still see in older BC towns that haven't been updated. I could see a diner with neon signs in the window, red and blue light reflecting off the pavement. A gas station with those old-style pumps, the tall rectangular ones. A motel with a vacancy sign, glowing pink. All of it lit up, all of it apparently open, which seemed strange for 3 in the morning but not impossible. Some small towns along these highways cater to truckers and travelers at all hours. What I didn't see were any other vehicles. No cars parked along the street, no trucks at the gas station, nothing in the diner parking lot. But that wasn't necessarily strange either. 3 a.m. in a small mountain town, most people would be home asleep. I pulled into the diner parking lot, my air brakes hissing as I came to a stop. The diner looked like it had been transplanted from another era. Chrome trim, big plate glass windows, neon sign above the door saying "Eat" in cursive letters. Through the windows, I could see the interior booths with red vinyl seats, a counter with chrome stools, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Everything looked clean and well-maintained, not abandoned or rundown. I sat in my cab for a moment, engine idling, looking at the diner and the rest of the town. Something felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Everything looked normal, looked like any number of small highway towns I'd stopped in over the years. But there was a quality to the silence, a stillness that seemed wrong for a town with all its lights on. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to exhaustion and the weird emptiness that comes with being awake at 3 in the morning. I climbed out of my cab, stretched, and walked toward the diner. The night was cold, that sharp mountain cold, and I could see my breath. The only sounds were my footsteps on the pavement and the distant hum of the diner's neon sign. The diner door was unlocked. I pushed it open, and a small bell chimed above me. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me. The interior was exactly what I'd seen through the window. Red vinyl booths, chrome-edged tables, a long counter with stools. Everything was clean, everything was in order. But there was nobody there. No waitress, no cook, no customers. Just an empty diner with all its lights on and, I noticed now, coffee brewing behind the counter. I walked further inside, my boots squeaking slightly on the checkered linoleum floor. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. Nothing. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the burble of the coffee maker. I approached the counter and saw that there were plates of food on some of the tables. A half-eaten burger at one booth, fries still in the basket. A slice of pie at another table, a fork resting beside it with a bite missing. At the counter, there was a coffee cup still steaming, a newspaper folded beside it. The food was warm. I could see condensation on the inside of the water glasses. The coffee in the cup behind the counter was hot enough that I could feel the heat radiating from it. This wasn't old food that had been sitting for hours. This was fresh, like someone had been eating 5 minutes ago and had just stepped away. I felt my skin prickle. "Is anyone here?" I called out, walking toward the back of the diner. There was a door that presumably led to the kitchen, and another that might have been a bathroom or storage. I pushed open the kitchen door. The kitchen was immaculate. Grill surface clean and gleaming, pots and pans hanging from hooks, everything in its place. And on the grill, there was food cooking, eggs and bacon sizzling away, the smell hitting me immediately. The fryer was on, oil bubbling, a pot of soup on a back burner, steam rising from it. But there was no cook, no one tending the grill, no one watching the fryer, just food cooking on its own in an empty kitchen. I backed out of the kitchen quickly, my heart starting to pound. This wasn't right. This was seriously not right. I looked around the diner again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Fresh food, hot coffee, lights on, everything operating normally, but no people, not a single person anywhere. I moved to the cash register and saw that it was open, bills and coins visible in the drawer. There were keys hanging on a hook behind the counter, labeled with things like storage and office. Everything was accessible, nothing was locked or secured. It was like everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their shift, in the middle of meals, in the middle of everything. I went to the front window and looked out at the rest of the town. The gas station across the street had its lights on, and I could see through the window that the interior was lit up as well. The motel's vacancy sign continued to glow pink. Every building on the street was illuminated, but I couldn't see a single person. No movement, no cars, no signs of life. A deep sense of wrongness washed over me, a primal unease that made every nerve in my body scream that I should leave. I'd been in empty places before, had stopped at rest areas in small towns in the dead of night where I was the only person around. But this was different. This place wasn't just empty, it was abandoned in the middle of being occupied. People had been here moments ago. Maybe were still here somewhere, but I couldn't see them or find them. I walked quickly back to the door, pushed it open, and stepped outside. The night air hit me, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I looked up and down the main street. Every building was lit. I could see inside the gas station convenience store, could see shelves stocked with products, could see the register waiting, but no attendant, no customers. I walked toward my truck, my eyes scanning the street, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of where everyone had gone. The silence was oppressive now, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Even the sound of my own footsteps seemed muffled, like the air itself was absorbing the noise. I climbed back into my cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. My phone had no signal, which wasn't surprising in these mountains, but somehow it made me feel even more isolated. I started the engine, the rumble loud and reassuring, and pulled out of the parking lot. As I drove back up the access road toward the highway, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see people emerge from the buildings, to see some explanation for what I'd witnessed. But the town remained lit and empty behind me, its neon signs glowing in the darkness. I merged back onto Highway 3 and didn't slow down until I was well past Princeton, didn't stop until I reached the outskirts of Cranbrook as dawn was breaking. The whole experience in the town had lasted maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most, but it felt like hours. When I got to Calgary later that morning, I checked my route logs, the GPS tracking that my company requires on all trucks. According to the logs, I'd made one stop on Highway 3, a 10-minute stop at around 3:07 a.m. But the location data was corrupted, showing coordinates that didn't correspond to anything, just a blank spot on the map. I spent the next several days trying to find the town. I searched online maps, pulled up satellite imagery of Highway 3, looked for any settlement I'd missed in 20 years of driving. Nothing. The stretch of highway where I'd stopped showed only forest on both sides. No side roads, no settlements, no towns. I called the regional district office and asked about communities along that route. They confirmed what I already knew. There are no towns in that 80-kilometer stretch. I talked to other truckers who run Highway 3 regularly, asked if they'd ever seen a small town off the highway between Hope and Princeton. Everyone looked at me like I was confused or joking. There's no town there, they all said. Nothing but trees and mountains. I've driven Highway 3 many times since that night, but I haven't taken that route at 3 in the morning again. I've rearranged my schedule, changed my departure times, done whatever I needed to do to avoid being on that stretch of highway at that specific time, because I'm afraid of what I might see if I look for that turnoff again. I'm afraid the town will be there, still lit up, still empty, still waiting. And I'm afraid of what it means that I found a town that doesn't exist, that can't exist. I'm afraid of why the food was still warm, why the coffee was still hot, why everything looked like people had just stepped away moments before I arrived. Where did they go? Did they leave, or were they taken? Or are they still there, somehow, in a way I couldn't see or understand? Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving, I think about turning around, going back to that stretch of highway at 3 a.m., looking for that turnoff again. Part of me needs to know if it was real, if I can find it again, if I can get some kind of explanation. But a bigger part of me knows that some questions aren't meant to be answered, that some things you stumble across in the darkness are better left alone. I still drive Highway 3, but now I watch the clock. And when it gets close to 3 in the morning, when I'm approaching that stretch of road, my hands tighten on the wheel and my eyes stay fixed straight ahead. I don't look for side roads, don't look for lights in the distance, because I'm afraid that one night I'll see them again. I'll see that town lit up and waiting, and this time I won't be able to resist the urge to stop. And I'm afraid that if I go back, I might find out what happened to all those people. Or worse, I might not come back at all. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and I've worked on the crisis line in Kamloops for the past 8 years. It's hard work, the kind that stays with you long after your shift ends, but it's important work. When someone calls that line, they're at the edge of something, and sometimes your voice is the only thing standing between them and a decision they can't take back. I've talked to hundreds of people over the years, people in every kind of crisis you can imagine, and I'd like to think I've helped some of them find their way back from that edge. But there's one place that keeps coming up in my work, one location that's appeared in more calls than anywhere else, and it's a place that locals know about but don't talk about with outsiders. There's an overpass on Highway 1, just east of Kamloops, maybe 10 minutes outside the city limits. It crosses the Trans-Canada Highway at a point where the road cuts through a small valley, and the drop from the overpass to the highway below is about 12 meters. Enough to be fatal if you land wrong, which people almost always do. Over the past 15 years, 17 people have jumped from that overpass. I know because I've looked into it, pulled records, talked to colleagues, tried to understand why this particular spot draws people the way it does. 17 confirmed deaths, all at night, and all during new moons when the darkness is complete. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence, but nobody can explain it. The local RCMP know about it, mental health services know about it, but there's no fence, no barrier, no signs warning people away. Just an overpass like dozens of others on Highway 1, except this one has claimed 17 lives. I've personally talked to 3 people who were planning to jump from that specific overpass, and each conversation has stayed with me in ways that other crisis calls haven't. The first was about 4 years ago, a man in his 30s who called the line around 2 in the morning. He was calm, eerily calm, and he told me he was standing on the overpass right then, looking down at the highway. I could hear the wind over the phone, could hear the occasional truck passing below. He said he'd been feeling drawn to this spot for weeks, that he'd driven past it dozens of times and each time felt a pull, a certainty that this was where he needed to be. I talked to him for over an hour, using every technique I'd learned, every strategy for building connection and finding reasons to stay. Eventually, he agreed to step back, to meet the officers I'd dispatched. They found him sitting on the guardrail, his legs dangling over the edge, but he came down peacefully. When I followed up with him later, after he'd been stabilized and started treatment, he told me something that made my skin crawl. He said standing on that overpass felt like coming home, like he'd been called there by something that knew him, that understood him. He couldn't explain it better than that, but the feeling had been overwhelming. The second person was a woman in her 20s, and she called on a night that happened to be a new moon, though I didn't make the connection until later. She was already on the overpass when she called, and she described the same feeling, a sense of being called, of belonging to that spot. She said she'd never been suicidal before, had no history of mental illness, but 3 weeks earlier, she'd driven past the overpass and felt something pull at her. She'd tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew stronger every day until she couldn't resist anymore. The third person I talked down from that overpass was a teenager, a boy who'd been struggling with depression for years. But what struck me about his call was that he'd never been to that overpass before, had no idea where it was, but he'd had dreams about it. Dreams where he stood on the edge looking down at the lights of passing vehicles, feeling a peace he'd never felt while awake. He'd looked up overpasses near Kamloops on Google Maps until he found the one from his dreams, and then he'd driven there. All 3 of these people survived because they called, because they gave me a chance to intervene. But I know there were others who didn't call, who went to that overpass alone and made the decision without anyone there to pull them back. 17 confirmed deaths, and I suspect there might be others. Attempts that were never reported. People who stood on that edge and felt the call but somehow found the strength to walk away. I started having dreams about the overpass myself about 6 months ago. Not suicidal dreams, nothing like that, but dreams where I was standing on the overpass looking down, watching the traffic below, and feeling that something was wrong with the place. Something old and hungry and patient. I'd wake up unsettled, and I started avoiding Highway 1 east of Kamloops when I could, taking alternate routes even though they added time to my trips. Last month, I had to drive past the overpass late at night. I'd been visiting my sister in Salmon Arm and was heading back to Kamloops, and there's really no other route that doesn't add an hour to the trip. It was just after 1 in the morning, and the highway was nearly empty. The moon was new, which I noted with a cold feeling in my stomach, remembering the pattern I'd discovered in my research. As I approached the overpass, my headlights picked out a figure standing on the edge. My heart lurched, and I immediately slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder as soon as I was past the overpass. I grabbed my phone, called 911, told them there was someone on the overpass who looked like they might jump. The dispatcher said they'd send units immediately, and I told them I was going back to try to help. I got out of my car and started running back toward the overpass. There's an access road that leads up to it, and I took it at a sprint, my breath coming hard, my mind already going through what I'd say when I reached whoever was up there. I'd done this before. I knew how to talk to someone in crisis, knew how to build trust and create space for them to step back from the edge. But as I got closer, as the overpass came into full view, I saw that there wasn't just one person. There were dozens of them, men and women, different ages, all standing along the guardrail in a perfect line, all looking down at the highway below. They were spaced evenly, maybe 2 meters apart, and they were completely motionless, not swaying, not shifting their weight, not making any of the small movements that living people make, just standing there like statues, all facing the same direction. I stopped running, my momentum carrying me a few more steps before I could fully process what I was seeing. My mind was trying to make sense of it, trying to find a rational explanation. A group suicide pact? Some kind of protest? But the stillness was wrong. The uniformity was wrong. Everything about it was fundamentally wrong. I started walking toward them slowly, my hands raised in what I hoped was a non-threatening gesture. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding thin in the night air. "I'm a crisis counselor. I'm here to help. Can someone talk to me?" No response. None of them turned to look at me. They just kept staring down at the highway, their faces expressionless, their bodies perfectly still. I got closer, close enough to see their faces clearly in the dim light from the highway below. And that's when recognition hit me like a physical blow. I knew some of these faces. Not all of them, but enough. The man in his 50s wearing a plaid jacket, I'd seen his photo in the newspaper 3 years ago, after he'd jumped from this overpass. The young woman in jeans and a hoodie, she'd been one of the 17. Her death 6 years ago devastating her family. The teenager boy he jumped 4 years ago. His school photo shared widely on social media as people tried to make sense of why. These were dead people, people who had died on this overpass, who had jumped and hit the pavement below and died. And they were standing here now, lined up along the guardrail, staring down at the highway with empty eyes. I felt my legs weaken, felt reality tilt in a way that made my stomach lurch. This wasn't possible. Dead people don't come back. Dead people don't stand on overpasses in the middle of the night. But I was seeing them as clearly as I'd ever seen anything, and some rational part of my brain was screaming at me that this was wrong, that I needed to leave, that I needed to run, but I couldn't move. I stood there frozen, staring at the line of figures, counting them. 23 people, more than the 17 confirmed deaths. Were there others I didn't know about? Or were there future deaths represented here, people who would jump but hadn't yet? One of them moved, just slightly, just a small turn of the head to look at me. It was the young woman in the hoodie, and her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils but the entire eye, like she was looking at me through holes in her face. Her mouth opened slightly, and I heard a sound, not quite a word but something that might have been trying to be a word, a rasping exhalation that made every hair on my body stand up. Then they all turned to look at me. All 23 of them, turning in perfect synchronization, their heads moving at exactly the same speed, all of them fixing those black eyes on me. And I felt it then, what those 3 callers had tried to describe: the pull, the call, the certainty that this was where I belonged. It washed over me like a wave, almost overwhelming. A feeling that if I just climbed up on that guardrail, if I just looked down at the highway the way they were looking, everything would make sense. Everything would be peaceful. I took a step forward before I caught myself, before I realized what I was doing. The pull was incredible, seductive in its intensity. It would be so easy to join them, to become part of that line, to finally understand what this place was and what it wanted. Sirens cut through the night, growing louder, snapping me out of whatever trance I'd been falling into. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on something, nearly falling. Red and blue lights appeared on the highway below, emergency vehicles approaching fast. I turned to run, to get back to my car, to get away from those figures and their black eyes and their silent call. When I reached the bottom of the access road, 2 RCMP vehicles were pulling up, and officers were getting out. I ran to them, breathless, trying to explain. "There are people on the overpass," I gasped. "Dozens of them. They're all standing on the edge." The officers looked at each other, then back at me. "Ma'am, are you the one who called this in?" one of them asked. "Yes, but there are so many more than I thought. You need to get up there. You need to stop them." They moved past me, heading up the access road with their flashlights, and I followed, my legs shaking. When we reached the top, when we got a clear view of the overpass, it was empty. The guardrail was clear, no one standing on it, no one anywhere in sight, just an empty overpass under a moonless sky. "There's no one here," one of the officers said, sweeping his flashlight across the entire length of the overpass. "They were here," I insisted. 23 people, standing right there, looking down at the highway. The officers searched the area thoroughly, checking both sides of the overpass, looking for any sign that people had been there. They found nothing. No footprints, no disturbance, nothing. One of them asked me if I'd been drinking, if I was on any medications. I told them I was sober, that I was a psychiatric nurse, that I knew what I'd seen. They were kind about it, more concerned than suspicious, and they offered to call someone for me. But what could I say? How could I explain that I'd seen dead people, that I'd recognized victims of previous suicides, standing on the overpass in the middle of the night? They'd think I was having a breakdown, and maybe I was. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up researching the overpass, looking through old news articles, finding photos of the 17 confirmed victims. 5 of them matched faces I'd seen on the overpass that night. 5 dead people, standing where they died, looking down at the highway below. I requested a leave of absence from work the next day, told them I needed time to deal with some personal issues. My supervisor approved it without question, maybe hearing something in my voice that worried her. I've been off work for 3 weeks now, and I don't know when or if I'll go back. I've tried talking to people about what I saw, but carefully, without giving details that would make me sound insane. I've talked to colleagues who work in mental health, to people who study suicide prevention, to local historians who know the area. No one can explain why that overpass attracts people the way it does. One historian mentioned that the overpass was built over an old indigenous trail, that there were stories about that valley being a place where spirits crossed over, but she couldn't give me specifics. I don't drive past that overpass anymore. I add an hour to any trip that would take me on Highway 1 east of Kamloops, taking routes that loop far out of my way. And I've started warning people, anyone who'll listen, that if they feel called to that place, they need to resist. They need to call someone, tell someone, do anything other than go there alone. Because I think I understand now what that overpass is. It's not just a place where people jump. It's a place that calls to them, that draws them in, that wants them. And everyone who answers that call, everyone who stands on that edge and looks down, they don't just die, they stay. They become part of whatever that place is, standing guard, waiting, calling others to join them. I recognized 5 faces that night, but there were 23 figures on that overpass, which means there are 6 more people who will answer the call, 6 more people who will stand on that edge and jump, 6 more deaths that haven't happened yet but somehow already have, their future selves already waiting on that overpass, already part of the line. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is that I felt the pull, I felt the call, and for a moment I wanted to join them. Part of me still does. Sometimes I'll be driving and I'll realize I'm heading toward Highway 1, toward that overpass, and I have to physically force myself to turn around, to go a different direction. Whatever is at that overpass is patient. It's been there for at least 15 years, probably longer, and it's hungry for more. Every new moon, I find myself checking the news, waiting to see if someone else has jumped, if that number has gone from 17 to 18, And I wonder how long it will be before I see my own face in that line, standing on the edge with black eyes, calling others to join me in whatever dark peace that place promises. I tell people not to go there, but I don't know if anyone listens. And I think about those 23 figures, about how some of them were people who had already jumped and some of them were people who hadn't yet. And I wonder if one of them was me,